It's time for Declare Your Independence with Ernest Hancock.
Believe me when I say we have a difficult time ahead of us. But if we are to be prepared for it, we must first shed our fear of it. I stand here without fear because I remember that I am here not because of the path that lies before me, but because of the path that lies behind me. I remember that for 100 years we have fought these machines. And after a century of war, I remember that which matters most. We are still here! Tonight, let us make them remember we are not afraid!
No fear here on Declare Your Independence with me, Ernest Hancock, and Sterlin Luhan, longtime friend in the crypto world that's always been a great guest for the show to get us what's up, because he's on the edge of. And, if I wanted to, know what's really going on behind the scenes, I want to talk to Sterlin, because, he's just open with us, tell us what's going on, and he's a fly on the wall, or maybe even at the table. So this is, all the stuff that's going on. Sterlin has, the finger in it. Well, one of the big things that's going on, of course, is the stable coins. There's a battle between decentralized people money, use crypto, and, GoldmanSachs.gov coin. It's here it comes. And with the Trump administration being, all cryptoed up, of course, they're making bank on their own, whatever they're doing. They see the opportunity, and the sons go, ooh, Trump Industries is we crypto now, So I want to know what's really going on, because this is a worldwide thing. And when they talk about things like, stable coins, your retirement money, yeah, but you got to buy treasuries. Come on. You can't just have, and do you get your private access to your keys, or is it on an exchange, or is it all the things that we learned in crypto was things like, no, you keep control of it. You have your keys. You're the one that's not going to an exchange and pinky swear they'll give it to you when it's kind of your money. You just can't have it now. This is the kind of stuff that goes on all the time. And in the crypto world, the whole point of crypto was a parallel society. Hell, it was not even on the grid. It was, separate, way over, don't care. We have it ourselves. We'll conduct our business in crypto, and based to what? Is it to, gold, precious metals, silver? What was it based on? Stable coin, the dollar. Yeah, we'll link it to the dollar. Let's do that. That'd be a good idea. And I'm going, no. This is what we were trying to get away from. So in the beginning, I would put, all right, how many ounces of silver do I get for a Bitcoin? And it used to be, back in the day, I remember it was like 15 or something like that. Then it got 100, 200. No, never mind. I don't keep track anymore. But the point is that it is a very fast, rapid, easy exchange between individuals that is almost instant. There's no third party. There's no checks, approval, cancellations, refund. It's done. Now, of course, they may have a policy, they return and bring it back, and I'll send you your crypto, and your refund is instant, and it doesn't have to go on a credit card later in the next billing cycle of, pinky swear. So this is a superior technology, a superior mechanism for which can be private, but will it be? Because here it comes. What we feared from the beginning. Programmable, permission-seeking, certification from the Crown of I'm allowed to do what? To use my money. And then you got to define money. So this is we're going to be having. We had a short conversation in the archive. When you go to Don will have the show up here, and you go into this show in the archive, and it will have the links to all our previous shows and the one that we did, I don't know, a few weeks ago. And it was, we were just kind of tight on time. It certainly had so much information that I wanted to make sure that we go, we need to block off a few hours that we're not going to, get interrupted. We'll start early and we'll just get her done. Because we need to get this in for myself, my friends, my family, our audience, our readers, that they have an understanding away from the bullshit. There's so much bullshit out there. And it has been the concept that started with Bitcoin, goes on to a bunch of others, that the promise to the Liberty community to get us involved, we were the ones that really pushed this technology, to get us involved, is that it was people money. It was you doing peer-to-peer immediate transactions. There is no third-party risk of it's in the vault and you can't have it kind of crap. So we're going, okay. But then there were a lot of people that wanted what they called wide adoption. For me, wide adoption was Grandma Just Button, the easy use wallet of it worked. That you want wide adoption, you gotta have that. Now there were some key people in there that made sure of that. They have different wallets and ways to access it on your phone. The computer made it very easy. My favorite is Edge Wallet, that Paul Play and those guys understood from the beginning this was a Grandma Just Button thing. You wanted wide adoption, you do that. Now, and of course there's other good ones too. I have a Bitcoin.com wallet that is not just Bitcoin, but it's Roger Vere's thing back in the day. So this is a really good opportunity for us to learn this. But what happened was the people that said wide adoption, what they kept saying, they wanted it government approved. They wanted them not coming after. They wanted to have exchanges. They wanted to be able to go in and out of the dollar. They wanted to shoehorn this new private, peerless, peer-to-peer, functional, no third party, the crown coming in doing it, money. They did not want permission slip from the crown. But some of these people did. They go, oh, no. We gotta be allowed. We got to get to where they're not going to come after us. We're going to be able to build all kinds of financial opportunities onto it and integrate with the legacy banking system. We're going to become the legacy banking system. That's what's happening. It's a conversion. And when they do that, it's just going to be the same thing. They turn crypto into paper like they did gold and silver with ETFs on stock exchange of whatever, and manipulate the price and buy and sell and do, and here we go. Same crap. You're going to have, you think you had violent swings in crypto prices, before? Well, here she comes. So I'm looking at this, and I need a better understanding of the entire ecosystem and how it's morphed into this. It's gone into being shoehorned into the legacy banking system to where you're not only having the same problems, it's worse. They are able to say you can't buy that, you have to buy that, and we get our rake right off the top at the transaction level. Pinky swear, you don't need an income tax because you're paying tax every transaction. It went and dispersed right out to everybody we wanted to get it to anyway. And they keep upping that number. They keep changing that number. It's greasy smooth to be able to change that number, and the money comes out of the transactions. This is the problem with the Federal Reserve. They get both sides a part of every transaction. This is when you do anything and they can surveil it and see it, not only do they get their cut, they can say whether you can or cannot use it for that purpose. Oh, and they tracked everything that you did. This is the one thing that we've been screaming about is the bad thing. And crypto was to keep us off of that grid. It wasn't on the grid. It was above the grid. But there are those that, we gonna get stinking filthy rich if we can get adoption and permission slip, and then, oh yeah, ours is going to be, well, it's going to peak out at whatever, and nobody's going to be making, oh my God, money anymore. They're just going to be surveilled. So that's where we're at. And the Trump administration, fortunately, you know, he's a billionaire, you know, with kids. We want to be billionaires, you know, times 15. I mean, you know, here they come. What are they going to do? Crypto. You know, Trump's got his own freaking crypto. I went and looked, and I bought some. I got $100 of Trump crypto, whatever it was. You know, what's it at now? It was still at least $90-something after I got it, whatever. I just did it. I'll take a look here in a minute. But, you know, they are in to our benefit, to our freedom, to our leave me aloneism? Probably not. Sterlin Lujan. Now, Sterlin Lujan is a cryptocurrency professional. He is a Logos Core contributor and futurist. I'll let him explain what that means. He is also the former communications ambassador for Bitcoin.com and author of the book Dignity and Decency, Rhapsodic Musings of a Modern Anarchist. Now, let's just start right there. All right, you modern anarchist. Sterlin, help me out, man. You know, what is it that you would use, the words you would use to describe yourself? Go for me.
Yo, Ernie, really happy to be on the show again. I'm glad we set this time aside so we can really dive into this, because there's definitely a lot of details and a lot of information that people aren't privy to that we're going to really get into. So I hope also there's new people in the audience that are here for this, because it's going to be great. All right, cool. So yeah, we can start with my book. I've been thinking about libertarianism, freedom, anarchism, and these problems that we face for over 10 years, maybe 15 years now. I'll give a little bit of background on how this started. You and I have talked about my background a couple of times, so I'll be brief here. In roughly 2005, I took the drug MDMA for the first time. But prior to taking that pill, I was completely asleep. I wasn't really thinking at all. I was just going through the motions. I thought I was going to, go to school again, get a job, get married, have a white picket fence, and just live a humdrum sort of life. But then I didn't always feel that something was right in society. As I was growing up, of course, I was force-fed different kinds of material and thought that what I needed to do was just follow orders, go through the motions. And then when I first took MDMA in 2005, the first thing it switched on this idea in my head that I can do more than I can with my life, and it also helped me review some of my own personal traumas and issues, and I came to terms with the fact that I can achieve more. And why didn't anybody in my life try to help me with this? Why didn't they help put me in a direction that is more creative and innovative and that matters? And so the first question that I asked after I took that pill was, why is this illegal? It actually is helping me. It has a positive influence on my own life and has had. As a result of that, I went back to college. I thought that was the direction to go. But of course, I became an autodidact, started reading a bunch of material. And the biggest thing was questioning why this drug was illegal to begin with. And that sent me down this path of trading the drug, becoming a bit of a dealer. And what that caused, of course, was me to get arrested and then charged with possession of MDMA and with the intent to deliver, and also a manufacturing charge and a conspiracy charge was given to me as well. So now I'm really emboldened to be an activist. After this happened, I ended up getting probation. It was during the Ron Paul evolution. Now we're circa 2009. And I started thinking, what can I do to push this movement forward? I read Ron Paul's books, of course, got into Murray Rothbard, read his book Anatomy of the State and For a New Liberty, and started thinking, man, we need to actually create this change. I was getting all this flack, of course, from the sides, people telling me that especially people close to me, telling me that this was illegal. You're the bad person. You're the bad guy. And I said, all I did was engage in free market activity. And I was actually telling people this. Why is this illegal? Why do you have to demonize me for this activity? So that's what really inspired my activism and my push toward freedom, it wasn't just because I read Anatomy of the State or just because I was reading books. It was because of direct experience with the system. So it was very personal to me. It was a very personal endeavor to do what I can to educate people and hopefully create change. This is how I got into this space to begin with. So the book really is material that I drew together. It's a collected works. It has my ideas in it as early as 2015 up until about 2019 or so. Well, actually, starts probably around 2013 and up to about 2019. So not quite 10 years worth of material. But it's me elaborating on my views of the philosophy of libertarianism and voluntarism. That's the first part of the book. And then the second part of the book focuses on a philosophy or a philosophical element that I worked on called relational anarchy, which just means that we should be trying to heal more divides in order to craft freer societies. And then, of course, the last part of the book is on cryptocurrency, some of my earliest thoughts on the space, the purpose of the technology. And I'll save some of that because that's more of what we're going to get into and what we're going to talk about. But as my philosophy has evolved quite a bit over the years, and what I typically refer to myself now is as a panarchist or a cosmopolitan thinker, and this is still sort of a species of anarchism, but it's not as constrained by various kinds of moralisms, but it still has a strong basis in Lockean contractarianism and notions of freedom. It's the only difference is that it very strongly emphasizes exit ideology, this notion that we should be able to leave societies that we don't want to live in and go and physically relocate to other places in the world. But it also suggests that we should try to exit these systems emotionally and spiritually. If we don't feel like a system is serving our needs, even mentally, for our personal psychological well-being, we should be able to explore other domains, right? Other ways of living, whether this is, I mentioned psychedelics earlier, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's your own personal spiritual traditions, even if it's Buddhism, no matter what it is, we shouldn't be stuck in these toxic cultures that turn our brains to mush. Instead, we should be able to explore all manner of different kinds of philosophies. This philosophy is also, I think I mentioned earlier, referred to as panarchy. Panarchy just means, and this is more to the physical component, it means that we should have the ability to exit and to enter different types of governance services, and we should be able to enter those on a contractual basis. So if we have a voluntarist mindset, we should be able to enter those communities that share those values. But even if we're a rampant statist and we believe in authority, that's fine, but people should have
to sign up for it.
That's right. People should have the ability to exit and leave that at their will. So this is really the guiding principles of my thought, and they've developed over the last couple of years because I've been so deeply embedded in the network state and the cyber state movement, which I know that we're going to get more into. But this is where I'm coming from, and I want to make it really clear that I'm glad that we're going to discuss a lot about the current situation with crypto. I'm very happy to explore the historical components of the crypto movement, where it really originated from, the philosophy that animated it, that helped structure it, and the minds that really came up with the initial ideas. We can also explore, you probably heard a lot of the conspiracy theories and some of it's conspiracy, some of it's not, but this notion that Bitcoin and some of the cryptocurrency ecosystem was originally seeded by the feds, right? So we can get into that as well. There's a lot of content and a lot of depth that is going to be really relevant and grist for the mill for this discussion, Ernie. I do think that overall, the theme that we're going to come back to, that you mentioned it earlier, and I think this is key. It's about creating parallel institutions, parallel financial economies, parallel societies, and parallel systems, so that we can exit. But it's not only about exit; it's also about demonstrating and showing that we can create tools, societies, communities, and networks that very strongly harbor our needs and our values, and that allow us to craft a new society without using any kind of violence or without trying to shut down the system in a sort of forcible way or forceful way. So, yeah, brother, that's where I'm at, and that's where I come from. We're happy to tug on whatever thread that you want, go in any direction on the convo we want to head.
Oh, lots of directions. All right, let me go ahead and show the audience, how to navigate to where you can get more Sterlin. This has been a really important journey, as we cover so many different things, but one thing that we do cover is, things that change the planet. I always, communication, propulsion, energy, a lot of fundamental things in your life, and governance, or lack thereof. And what happens is, communication is the number one thing for me. And when you are able to communicate prices in a free open market, that communicates prices. That communicates value. That communicates, and when you have a rapid, unfettered, smooth transition between that without all these, what Patrick Burns calls it, pig's breakfast, this all of a sudden these bleeds that go everywhere, these commissions, these taxes, these fees, it's just, because they can. And it didn't used to be that way. This country didn't run on it. The more automated, the more computer, the more bureaucrats you had, the more typewriters, keyboards, and computers. All of a sudden, we lose more and more of ourselves to a system. Well, if the system doesn't serve individual liberty, then why you got it? It's there to enslave me. Oh, thanks. I get to pay extra for that? Okay, well, that's good. So our productivity, as it comes in industriousness, in all the availability to us and technology, we thought when cell phones came out and ubiquitous in the 90s, and a businessman, I was like, wow, this is awesome. I don't have to be stuck at my phone all the time. I could be out in the field. I could be conducting business while I'm driving. It had to be, just in my personal life, 20, 30% increase in productivity. Where did that increase in value go? My lifestyle didn't improve. My taxes just went up. Regulation just went up. It just bled to somebody else. They took that additional productivity with computers and communication with cell phones and so on, and they sucked it right out of me. Sons of bitches, So this is what I just wanted to show you real quick, how to navigate the site to get to where you need to go here. Now, after the show, we have here, you can probably click on here to get to it, or you go top right up here, and then it'll go to the shows. And you sit there and you go, where's Sterlin? There he is. And we'll have, the full thing up, and it'll have the MP3, MP4, and all that kind of stuff. When you go, you click onto that, it'll go to today's show. And that is, I got it open here. And you have, here's the show and him, a little bio about it and so on. And then it says, Sterlin's previous interviews here. Click here. Boom. You go there and you'll see all the shows that Sterlin and I have done over the years. Now, the first one was back in 2017. So this is what, 8 years ago? Yeah. Okay. Nice. So this is, math. But but the last one here, you have, this was August 29th. So it's like a month ago. A month ago, he and I talked, and this is a good one to start with here. You go there and you listen to that show, and that'll kind of segue into this one, part one, part two. But you listen to this one, you're going to get all that one anyway. So, here we go. Now, I just wanted you guys to understand that so that you get a full, we're talking to someone that I like, that I trust, that I know is in the middle of everything. He's done his own cryptos. He's been around the world. He's spoken at he goes to all the meetings. Everybody likes Sterlin. Hey, Sterlin, you're here. Everybody smiles. Glad he's there. Hey, welcome, come over, join the inner club, and we'll sit around and talk geek with you, okay? That's why Sterlin's here, because he knows. Because he knows the technology, he knows the philosophy, and he knows the people. This is what I wanted to talk about. The transition into what they started to commonly call DeFi. They're going decentralized finance. DeFi, are you DeFi'd up? You're going to get all DeFi'd. Let's get DeFi'd. So they get, into this, and it's decentralized, whatever. They just, called it that because there was a lot of services in there. You didn't have to give up your Bitcoin anymore. You could collateralize it and borrow on it. I'm going to keep my Bitcoin over here, but then as it takes a drop, if you don't cover your margin call or the difference, they go, sucks to be you. We took it. we sold it to ourselves, okay? And your Bitcoin became ours as soon as it hit a dip. This is something that they're really pushing again. Well, there was a whole bunch of Bitcoin got wiped out by people went into financial institutions because they'll sit back and they'll go, you don't want to give up your Bitcoin. You don't want to miss on all these gains of it going to $1 million. Well, it's 100 whatever thousand. Do you? Borrow on that. Boom. Then it takes a dip to, below 80 or so. Oh, I'm sorry. We had to liquidate that to cover, our losses they got, and then they run it back up again. Have we seen this pattern before, Sterlin? This is the kind of stuff. Think I'm not paying attention? I can see this crap, a mile away. And it's going into these banks that have been using the government force saying, you can't do this. You didn't have SEC, permission slip. You're going to jail, and you're going to jail, and you're going to jail, and you're going to jail to do this because you're competition, and you did it before we did. And you know what you did that you went to jail for and you're doing multiple life sentences or whatever for? We just started that. It's us now. It's approved. It's trumped up. We got J.D. Vance in there and, Palantir with Peter Thiel surveilling everything. We had to get all the surveil everything in place before we, gave it government approval, which now we got that. Now you have to use crypto. Damn it, So how far off am I?
No, you absolutely nailed it. I think this is what we can all refer to as the hijacking of the ecosystem. This is the same thing that Roger wrote about in his book, right? Hijacking Bitcoin. Right. Because what ultimately the government's...
I got to say this. He's 10 years out of the country. He's given up his U.S. citizenship because of all this stuff. He sees what's coming. It's 10 years that after the time that they can ever go for any taxes or whatever. Then he writes hijacking Bitcoin. Boom! They arrest him in Spain. He's sitting there waiting because they're not doing anything of just we rule you. He is outside of this whole by any measure. He goes, how much do I got? What extortion fee I got to pay to get out of here? Okay, there you go. And they go, it wasn't enough. Jail. You wrote hijacking Bitcoin. You're so freaking not allowed. And the fact that Roger Ver has been detailing what we're talking about here, they make you a target. It is so insidious. We're up against evil. Okay, I apologize. I just want to make sure that was clear. When you mentioned that book. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that also, Roger has been an outspoken critic of governmental systems too, and he's definitely been in more of a position to influence people, and he was also one of the earliest ones to call out the hijacking of Bitcoin, of course, well before he wrote the book in circa 2015 when they were having the so-called block size wars. Roger was a strong advocate in the notion of mass adoption and getting cryptocurrency in the hands of as many people as possible. And of course, there was a concern that Bitcoin was becoming ossified, right? In the sense that instead of expanding making the technology usable for everyone and easier to use and making transaction fees lower, instead the developers they censored people who had that view, and then they took the protocol in a different direction. So the original use case, Satoshi outlined it in the white paper. It's on the very first page. It's in the heading. It's peer-to-peer electronic cash. So what it is now is that, everyone, the narrative is that it's digital gold. And this is one of the...
No, and you're right. That was the title.
Right.
That was what it said. And they go, we don't care.
That's right. Yeah. Who cares about that? And now it's kind of referred to as more of a living document, even though it's a scientific paper that really outlined what it is and what it's supposed to do. It's completely insane. So,
have you actually heard somebody say that? It's a living document.
I have. Yeah, I have before. So it's arguments online. People say stuff like this all the time, and they justify it by saying, well, Satoshi had this view and that view, and then they cherry pick different comments that he had. Anyway, so it's an ongoing issue. But of course, now the hijacking of Bitcoin has reached its apotheosis in the current administration, where now the whole space has become highly institutionalized and financialized, and everybody's focused on keeping crypto in centralized exchanges, also being like 2 or 3 times removed by using different types of futures contracts and doing, you mentioned the trading, doing different kinds of trading that constantly keep the money flowing back into the system, into governments, into financial networks, and it's directly opposite. It's diametrically opposed to the original use case and impetus for Bitcoin, which was to return financial autonomy and sovereignty to the individual, for us to be able to trade with each other in a peer-to-peer fashion, and then to spread that economic activity around to as many people as possible. Well, now it's just like you mentioned earlier, it's GovCoin. It's GovCoin. It's FedCoin. It does not have the original impetus. Of course, this has now transformed into this notion of not only is Bitcoin going to be the quote unquote digital gold of the state, but now they want to roll out for cash, right? Which was what Bitcoin was supposed to be. They're rolling out a stable coin in the form of really a CBDC, right? This has been the focus of government. This is, of course, the Trump administration, they have new legislation in place to put this forward, right? They have the Crypto Clarity Act, they have the Genius Act, and this legislation taken together, what it really means for the cryptocurrency ecosystem is that they're putting out a stable coin that is no better than an Excel spreadsheet that they fully control, that's fully centralized, that is certainly permissioned. And what this does is make all of our financial transactions completely surveillable, freezable, seizable. At least Bitcoin had one thing going for it. You couldn't seize funds right within the context of the blockchain, not technically. But with these stable coins, it's not even decentralized to any degree anymore. And a guy at a bank or a corporation can just press a button and freeze your funds. And this already happens right now with the most popular stable coins, right? So Tether and USDC are both completely cucked by the system. I've actually, so you know as well as I do that I've worked in the exchange space for some time in the past, right? After I worked with Roger, I worked with Ernesto at Crypto Space and CryptoMex, and we had people come to us saying, "Hey, why is my Tether?" And sometimes it's to the tune of $1 million+ Why is it frozen in the account? Well, that's because Tether, they can freeze those funds at any moment, and of course they sought us out to help try to unfreeze them. But when they realized they have to go through this really opaque bureaucratic process to try to claw those funds back. Eventually, if they don't have all the proper paperwork and documentation, if anything went wrong in their process, there's absolutely no way they can get those funds back, and usually they don't, right? Especially if the government alleges that it's tied even loosely to some type of criminal activity. And of course, and this is another conversation we can get into, brother. But if those coins have been traced, right, using blockchain analytics and blockchain forensics like a cipher trace or Chainalysis, they already know your transaction history. And this goes to show the financial surveillance panopticon that has been built around us because of these cryptocurrencies that are easy to track, and now all are completely controlled on the outsides, at very least, by the government apparatus. So we're in a really dire situation. By the way, if you don't mind, I'd love to go back and talk a little bit of history, so people know what happened, how it happened, and why, and what actually animated and what energized the cryptocurrency space to begin with.
I love history. Yeah. Go.
Okay. So yeah, we're gonna be history pilled right now. So originally, I mentioned Bitcoin in the white paper, very specifically talked about disintermediation of third parties, talked about being a peer-to-peer electronic cash. But I think even more important or critical than that is the political message that was inscribed in the Bitcoin Genesis block. The Genesis block is really the first block that was ever mined in the Bitcoin network. And in that block, whoever Satoshi Nakamoto is said, "Chancellor on the brink of second bailout." So the message there is that Bitcoin was originally created as a response to the 2009 financial collapse. And right. the messages that circulated online during that time period was the fact that we can't trust these guys to take care of our money. We can't trust them to do what's right on the back end. Really what the traditional financial and fiat system is just one large grift. It's one large pyramid scheme. It's fake news, right? It's a scam to begin with. The whole monetary system is a house of cards. And so that is why Bitcoin came into existence. The original purpose, at least as it's understood at face value, was to push back against these systems and to regain our financial autonomy. And now people are probably wondering, where did even this idea originate from? Well, the people who originally thought about these ideas and brought them forward were referred to as cypherpunks or crypto anarchists, right? The cypherpunk movement emerged really in the 90s, well before Bitcoin came into existence in 2009 with the white paper. And what the cypherpunks, they originally had the idea for having a peer-to-peer currency or a digital e-cash that would have privacy preserving characteristics, would have strong encryption safeguards, and then could be passed around and traded economically online without being stopped. And Timothy May wrote about this in his article called The Crypto Anarchist Manifesto. And the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto laid down a number of different ideas. Not all of them were related to eCash, but they were all about philosophy. It was based, Timothy May said, what we need to do is have strong privacy, strong encryption safeguards in our communications online, in our email. He defended ideas like PGP, which is Phil Zimmerman's pretty good privacy. He defended having encrypted email and communications, and this was all the ideas that were being circulated in the 1990s. And then as a result of this, there were early cryptographers, even someone in the Bitcoin network, Adam Back, was deeply involved in the cypherpunk movement early on, and created part of the protocol to Bitcoin, which is called Hashcash. Okay, so remember Adam Back's name? And then one of the first iterations of cryptocurrency was David Chaum's eCash, right? So, and he was a hardcore cypherpunk. He wrote his papers in the context of creating anonymized technologies in order to provide more liberty. And the reason that the crypto anarchists came into being is because they saw the writing on the wall. This was the early stages of the internet. They already saw governments trying to create backdoors into our communication networks. You saw this in an early iteration of what was referred to as the Clipper chip. The Clipper chip was basically a backdoor, a hardware-based backdoor, where a government agent could have access to your communication channels. All this was happening in the 1990s. Also during the time, early encryption protocols or early encryption, even the mathematic formulation, was considered a munitions for export purposes in the 90s, right? If you this means if you went abroad and overseas and you tried to trade any kind of cryptographic teachings, then you could be labeled a criminal. And so this is actually the founder of PGP, Phil Zimmerman. He actually did this as an act of activism. He went to Mexico with his technology, his protocol, in a sort of an open source way, and spread it around. And they arrested Zimmerman, and he actually went on trial for this. And of course, he had a lot of support from the early cypherpunks, and he was able to get those charges dropped. And this is all chronicled. I really recommend a book by Stephen Levy called The Crypto Wars. He was a journalist who chronicled all of this. But this is how the story panned out.
Well, let me add to that from an activist having actually used PGP in the mid-90s, I think it was. And it was early on, and you would be doing email. It's like 94, around in there. And you would have, people would send out email, and it would have your public key, the big hash of whatever. And it's how Bitcoin and a lot of encryption works. You have a public key and the unlock with a private key. Well, if you encrypt your email in your private key, then send it out, the public key can decipher it. I mean, all of a sudden you're reading it on your email. If you send the person that sent it an encryption with the public key, then only they, with the private key, could read it. So it gave you private communication both ways. But it had one other aspect that, a lot of people didn't realize until it happened. There was a guy that was board of directors on National Rifle Association, NRA, named Knox, I think it was, Neil Knox, or his son or something. I think it was a father and son pair, whatever. But what happened was, during the mid-90s, when you had the assault weapon ban and their gun control and Clinton and Easton's doing whatever the hell they're doing, it was right before the election. Even the Republicans, we got to be for the assault weapon ban, or the Democrats will beat us. The people, the media is against it. Where we're like, Are you stupid? You know, so anyway, that's where Second Amendment is for everyone came from. Safe. Are you a safe gun owner? Are you an unsafe congressman? You know, so we were having a lot of fun with that. Well, what happened was that put us on the list, you know, that kind of stuff. But right before the election, there was an email circulated in all these right to keep and bear arm email lists and so on. Before you had platforms like Facebook and all that kind of stuff, you had email lists. You would sign up for it, and you knew who the trolls were and being buttheads and, you know, whatever. But those were the good old days. You could ask any question of anything about anybody, and usually dominated by libertarian philosophy, just saying, you know, the libertarians, you know, had a hold on this digital thing. And just by philosophy. Well, what happened, the damn libertarians are screwing up their, you know, machine for getting their, you know, communist Republicans elected. You may choose from communist candidate A or fascist candidate B, and we don't care. Well, what happened was, this Knox guy was very influential, and he was given a lot of detail on who the real gun grabbers were and what's going on and this and that. So people are just doing what they say. Right before the election, they sent out this big broadcast communication or whatever. Neil Knox says, vote for this guy and not this guy and that. And it was all BS. It was just, so what had to happen is they been using this PGP encryption. He'd go, look, I'm sending out my recommendations and so on encrypted with my private key so that my public key, you can tell it's me. That the only person that could be able to do that and what was known to be his public key was this one guy. So PGP identified intentionally, didn't make it secret, made it public. Made it very, because it's not just about privacy, it's about publicity. The public gets to see what's up. Encryption worked both ways. It identified someone. So then you go, okay, well, if they, them, those give everybody to transact or communicate anything, and you got to use your private key, well, then they know it's you, kind of deal. I mean, you know, so this always double-edged sword everywhere. So PGP, when Zimmerman, I remember the story. I mean, he uploaded it from a payphone of, and it's out, whatever the hell. He get it out there. Well, then the code, open source, had, you know, some hash to it, and guys would wear T-shirts and get in front of the camera when they're covering in front of the, you know, the courthouse or something. Oh, look, the network broadcast that. They're violation of munitions. You know, put them in jail. I mean, you know, it's just stupid stuff, activist stuff. Well, what happened was it was a First Amendment violation. You know, you go, look, it's just ones and zeros. I'm communicating the ability of whatever, and, you know, this is a First Amendment. Nope. It's ITAR. It's a, you're sending missiles. You're sharing, you know, selling F-16s to Iran without a permission slip, you know. So this is, what happened was, when they did that, they go after them. Then eventually it becomes a First Amendment, and they finally dropped it. It just got ubiquitous enough to where it didn't matter anyway, and other competing of never mind. What was interesting is that years later, 20, 30 years later, you have Cody Wilson that did files that would go on his Ghost Gunner that you could mill out your own AR-15 lower, okay? So then you're bypassing serial numbers, and because we still had a little bit of freedom of you could make your own gun. So I got one of the first Ghost Gunners. We had Cody Wilson on all the time. We were just keeping him alive. And what happened was they went after him, and what did he do? He used the lawyers from the Phil Zimmerman case, that was a First Amendment thing, on a Second Amendment case because it was a First Amendment case. It was sharing files that allowed you to produce your own gun. Not allowed? Isn't this a Phil Zimmerman thing? You know? So finally so then of course they go after him and get, you know, honeypot kind of whatever and made you look bad and you better go low key or we got your number kind of thing. Okay? So he's kind of, you know, a little bit low key. So this has been a continuation of a violation of individual constitutionally protected Bill of Rights. And this is why, to service of the man. Well, as you get through all this, you can start to see there's already predetermined law. There's already precedent set of what this is about. And they, them, those don't care. They don't like it. They're the banking system. They want what they want, and they're anybody that doesn't seek, get, and do permission slip for technology to even freaking make it on the law books before it's illegal until we figure out what it is or how we can best get it. Is it a commodity? Is it a currency? Is it property? Is it? Well, we haven't decided yet, but we're going to arrest you anyway, and we'll figure it out. This is how it's been going. And now that it can be in the service of the man, here we go. So that is the link that brings you up to speed on the Zimmerman case about encryption and what they're going after. In the late 80s, I think it was 88 or something, there was an article written. It was called From Crossbows to Cryptography. And the point that they were making was, in that paper that we republished in our newspapers and stuff, made a big deal out of this because we're libertarians and we understand what was going on. So in the late 80s, what it was is they made the point that from crossbows to cryptography, the title gives you kind of what it's about. The reason they made crossbows illegal, the Crown goes, nope, the peasants, out in their ox carts transporting the straw for and harvesting the wheat from their field or kind of whatever. You definitely don't get to have a crossbow. Why? Where'd that come from? It was gun control. Because the knights in their shining armor, those bolts, the short arrows and the powerful crossbow go right through their armor, take out the knight. I am here in the king's name of and he's gone. You didn't have to, be a big swordsman or have a bunch of people going after the knights. All of a sudden they just wind up dead and you go back to plowing. They're going, the king went, no, hell no. You're not allowed to do that. Same thing with the cryptography. It gave the power to people, enormous amounts of power to be private. And they can't have that. They predicted this in the late 80s, a lot of these cyberpunk guys you're talking about. One of those guys is Paul Rosenberg. Paul Rosenberg's a good friend. He comes on the show, a great deal. He made his gazillion, crypto money, and he's fine out of Chicago, and he writes a lot, and you see a lot of stuff on Freedom's Phoenix, and he comes on the show. But he was part of this, and he wrote the book, Lodgings for Wayfaring Men or something. He was a speaker at one of our Freedom Summits, and he's the author. That was a big secret. He didn't want, to get targeted because of the kind of books that Sterlin's writing back then. Oh, hell no, man, they come get you. So it was a big, secret of who wrote this thing, and it kind of got out. He was a speaker people came with their books from when they were freaking high school for him to sign. I mean, it was amazing. This philosophy will not die. And Sterling's one of those guys that know the history, know it, lived it, had personal experience with the man, understands the mindset of this, and is sharing with us. So I wanted to get that Zimmerman thing in there and how it relates, and came all the way up to the Second Amendment and Cody, and now. Please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice color, Ernie. I think we put the story together quite well. I think a good way to continue the story for now is where we're at, how the cryptocurrency and the Bitcoin ecosystem really got hijacked, and what that looks like right now, and then where we're going and how do we get out of that. Because I think a lot of people too, they want solutions. This is another thing. It's really easy for a lot of us to get embedded in these black pill mindset that there's absolutely no hope. And of course, governments, they're always going to continue to come in, and they're going to thwart any kind of activity that provides more freedom or allows an individual to start thinking for himself and to either gain some type of autonomy or self-responsibility outside of the system. Now, one thing, so how this really, the hijacking of Bitcoin after it kind of started in 2015, there's another component of this too, aside from the propaganda. And by the way, if everyone doesn't know, in 2015, when people were when they were promoting Bitcoin for what it was actually intended to be used for, as cash and as a tool of liberation, there a ton of censorship. And Roger chronicled this in his book as well, but there was a ton of censorship. And I was actually, Ernie mentioned it, I was there. I worked with Roger at the time in 2015. I had front row seats to this initial hijacking. And one of the first things that they did and this isn't a conspiracy, this is documented pretty much everywhere, so a lot of the conversation around what was happening was occurring in a major Bitcoin thread on Reddit called Our Bitcoin. And anytime that someone brought up the idea of expanding the block size, and let me explain what that means real quick. In Bitcoin, the blocks are limited It was a 1 megabyte. I think it's 2 megabytes now as a result of SegWit, but technically the blocks were limited. And what that means is when the blocks fill up, what it does is it creates a marketplace for transactions, meaning the miners get to choose what transactions get ordered in the block and then published on the blockchain. And if the network is really, really busy, those blocks fill up very quickly, and then any other transactions are just waiting in what's called the mempool, and that means they're waiting to be added to a block and then added to the transaction. So what happens is fees get really high as the network intensifies because there's this market now for transactions. So you could actually pay more to have your transaction included in a block and then added. But what this does, it increases transactions, it slows down transaction speeds tremendously. So the solution to this is very simple. It's just to raise the block size. But all these folks came out of the woodwork in crypto. Now we refer to them as Bitcoin maximalists. And what they wanted to do was to keep the blocks small because, and their argument was this was for security, right? If you have smaller blocks, you can improve decentralization and secure the network, because as you raise block sizes, that requires more, in their view, requires more sophisticated hardware and will ultimately contribute to less decentralization of the network, harming security. But of course, the thing that they didn't consider or they didn't talk about, and anybody who made this case got censored, was the fact that you could implement adaptable block sizes. You could increase it a little bit, and that's not going to have an impact on block size. And there were also people who were running during the time that were running experiments on the block size that actually said that no, you can increase the block size, and over time hardware improves anyway. You know, this is Moore's law. This is what Kurzweil called the law of accelerating returns. All of our hardware improves over time, so it's just going to grow and evolve together, and so we can expand the block size because the hardware is going to be where we need it to be.
Okay,
anyway.
let me help with this block size thing. You know, because you're a geek. You know
True, it's true.
So the people understand what this means. When you go and your comparison with like a Visa or MasterCard, they can make a gazillion transaction a second. I mean, you know, it's not limiting on how many credit card transactions you could do. Every restaurant, every freaking street vendor, you got whatever they're doing, you know, transactions. Now it's a third-party banking kind of, you know, whatever infrastructure, but it's a lot of energy and power. Bitcoin crypto uses so much power. I'm going, you know how much brick and mortar there is out there in these places doing? I mean, come on, man. I mean, just the employees driving the work, you know. But what happens is you have a block. You know, that's why I call it blockchain. Every 10 minutes, the way Bitcoin works, and other ones kind of follow the same for proof of work, whatever. So imagine this. You have all these transactions that you're doing, and they can do like, so many a second, so many, but it's not anywhere near what it needs to be to do bubblegum money. That's why I get accused. What do you want, Ernie? Bubblegum money? Absolutely. It's a currency. I mean, you get it down to 0.00000, like the 8th decimal point of a Satoshi is just 100 millionth of a Bitcoin. I mean, it gets down to, you know, less than pennies kind of stuff. So you go, okay, I wish to make a transaction. Well, it only sees a transaction, whether it's $1 million or a penny. It don't care. You know, we got it in this memory pool of all these transactions in that 10-minute period go into this memory pool. The miners take all of those transactions. They do run it through a crypto thing called a Merkle root that, you know, gives you a hash that represents all of that. Then they start having monkeys throwing darts at dartboards to hit the magic and the processing power of ding, we win. I get all the transactions and some bonus Bitcoin for solving that block. Okay. Then that block creates a number that goes to the beginning that links to the next block of transactions. That mempool, that 1 megabyte of a megabyte. Seriously, you think we got megabytes? I mean, you know, we got, you know, octobytes or whatever hell now. So this is back 15 years ago. And the technology, you think it's kind of, memory's got cheaper now, we can process more seriously. So the argument that we had to keep it to 1 megabyte. 1 megabyte worth of transactions. Well, what would happen is as it got more popular, it would build up. And there was a mechanism for increasing that size. That was, from the beginning. Everybody knew that you could do that. Well, Bitcoin and the Bitcoin maximalist and Bitcoin the way Bitcoin, we want to be able to make money on Bitcoin, is that if you kept it down to 1 megabyte, then you had competing transactions. Now you got all these transactions to process, and the miners would go, well, let's see, we got 1 million transactions here in this 1 10-minute block. I think that we're going to process the ones that pay the highest fees. So then you got a competition. Now I want my $1 million transaction to my yacht to be able to, and my $300 that I did to whatever doesn't, not that big a deal to me, and I just put in and, I need, I'll pay a quarter. I'll pay it $1. No, you want your transaction, as it's getting popular and it's starting to explode in usage, you're going to pay up to $60 for your transaction. I remember I paid $30. I had a paper wallet that Mycelium had done as a promo thing where I had it sitting on my desk and I was showing it to my audience a lot. I go, okay, now this is a paper wallet, this is how, whatever. And I had it sitting there. It was Christmas Day, and one of my sons, big crypto guy, and he goes, security violation, boom, and he swept it and took it. And I go, you son of a bitch. That one transaction cost $36. And I went, goddamn, I won't get some. So he was just trying to be funny, but what happened? I knew better than to do the transaction during that time. Enormous fees. All of a sudden, one of the promises that Bitcoin had low fees, so then they can't say it's digital cash anymore. It's a store of value. That was not what the freaking white paper said. It was digital bubblegum money, okay? Well, they took away that, so then here comes Roger Ver, Bitcoin Cash, and the fork and all that stuff. They go, all we have to do is increase the memory pool size. We can go 2, 4, 8, whatever, it doesn't matter. We can have all these, and then it gets back to very cheap again. Well, Bitcoin didn't want that. Here comes the developers getting paid by Blockstream, which was funded by DeCastries. Hal DeCastries, who was he? He was a big insurance, multi-gazillionaire out of France that had whatever, and chairman of Bilderberger for 2 years. And he's getting the Bitcoin now, doing the development of we're not increasing the block size. Why do you think that is? Because they were making money as miners on the processing of this, and they needed it limited as opposed to unlimited because that is what made them the money. So I'm going, you sons of bitches. Then they go Lightning Network, whatever, different off-chain kind of whatever, which might as well just been bank branches. I mean, you could see the shoehorning of this into a legacy banking system. Here we got the ETFs, electronic trading funds, where we can manipulate it. We can do it on leverage. We can turn gold and silver into paper. And that's exactly what they're doing with Bitcoin right now. And we'll get into the stablecoin stuff. I'll let Sterlin finish his show. But when you're talking about block size, I need to make sure normies out there need to understand what that means. The blocks were kept intentionally small unnecessarily, as, keep in mind, this is 15 years ago that Bitcoin started. You think we got faster processing speeds? Think we got more powerful computers? Think we got more memory that's cheap as hell? Do you think? Well, they don't care. What they were looking for was to have a limited resource so that they can make money off of it. And anything, and that's why they were so pissed off at Roger Ver, this thing's called Bitcoin Cash. You got the word Bitcoin in there? You're so not allowed. That must be touted as counterfeit. You're a counterfeit. And this is what this stablecoin thing is going to go. Everything that they want is approved by the crown, and everything else is counterfeit. Just like they were doing that Bitcoin in the beginning was counterfeit because it wasn't a U.S. dollar going through a bank. Well, now that it's approved, any competition with that central bank digital currency is counterfeit. And how they were able to do it is, you just do it. Well, then they would have to, have all these people and all this money and do that. I go, well, then they'll do that. Well, you think they don't got enough money? But they would be really hard. I go, yeah, but can they? Can they? Is it physically possible? Guess what? They're doing it. Okay? So that's what's happening. So this block size thing was an unnecessary restriction on capacity so that it could be monetized and controlled by they, them, those. How far off am I, Sterling?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. So the main thing that everyone has to know is this was a narrative that they purposely shaped to push the ecosystem in this direction. And then, of course, you're right. They wanted to say the only way that we can scale Bitcoin is by having a second layer solution. And for the longest time, they did talk about the Lightning Network. And you're right. There's massive problems with the Lightning Network in terms of its surveillability, in terms of the ability for people to seize funds from it potentially. But even if we don't get into that, because there's a lot of debates around that as well, it's still the fact that it's not widely used. It still hasn't been widely used. But I still talk to people today in the Bitcoin community, and I mention these problems of its speed, of its ability to be used as cash, and they still to this day say, well, go and use the Lightning Network. And my initial retort is always, well, a lot of the companies who are using Lightning Network, they have stopped using it. And then they don't even realize that they stopped using it, right? Exodus used to have Lightning. I have an Exodus wallet. That's no longer a service on Exodus. A lot of these exchanges stopped using the Lightning Network because nobody was using it. So that's one of the huge problems. It never did really gain a critical mass of users to be usable. And then even if it did, it's still not exciting, right? It's not actual decentralized and permissionless. And there's already been exploits and hacks on the Lightning Network. You've probably seen this over the years.
Lightning represents a bunch of other.
Yeah, okay.
Let me go ahead and let me get so we can get past Lightning. We don't need to get.
Yeah, we don't have to dwell on it. Yeah.
It was an effort by they, them, those, because the transaction fees, because of the small block size, competing transactions, you could get your thing done. Oh, it's fast. Well, no, it's not. If you're only paying a quarter for a transaction or 3 cents or what it used to be, and they're willing to pay $30 for their transaction. They got a bunch of those. You just never get confirmed. It'd be, a week later, 2 weeks later or something. So Bitcoin was not cheap and it was not fast anymore. Oh, you want it to be cheap and fast? Well, what we've done is we created this off-chain, this separate little thing over here called the Lightning Network, and it's lightning fast, and it'll go, but it wasn't really Bitcoin. It was what they had created. It was like these separate branches off of Bitcoin that didn't even settle on until they closed that channel. It was a bank branch. You might as well just called it Wells Fargo. Now, what they would do is they'd say, well, it's like, Domino's Pizza or Pizza Hut or whatever got their own pizza chain of Lightning, kind of whatever. Doesn't matter. You can do it fast and this. And it was complicated. It was a pain in the butt. They had SegWit. They had all this other crap. And every one of these efforts were to try and keep the Bitcoin block small, so you had competing transactions there and have something not Bitcoin over here kind of sort of linked to it of something else, of a bank branch of shoehorn into the legacy banking system. That's what was going on. And anybody understood anything like looking at it going, well, you might as well call it a bank branch. You guys, ooh. So that's enough with, Lightning and all these others was all just an attempt to try and give you the ability in a wallet to have a lower cost transaction using almost kind of sort of crypto. And this was because they wanted to keep the block size small.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they had fewer transactions.
Well said, Ernie. We can move on to even the juicier stuff that happened sort of politically and socially after, but it definitely was relevant to for folks to have an understanding of the text. So thanks also for the clarifications. So what happened after this? Of course, now you can everyone.
Okay, I want to make it clear. My clarification is just experience as a activist user back here for grandma. Just trying to understand what we're talking about. So I'm always going to Sterlin. How far off? I'm kind of right? I mean, I just want to make. So I'm not the expert he is. I'm just giving, in the popular, ethos, the talk shows, the news, the actual impact on what this is supposed to be. That's what I'm doing, just to clarify, because we got all day. That's why we sit 3 hours. We're going. So relax. Sterling's going to get to say everything he wants. You're going to learn everything you need to know, but I just need to make sure you're following this when I need to. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So the key point here is Ernie's exactly right. This was just a way for them to say, hey, we can we try to have our cake and eat it too, right? We can give you guys what you quote unquote want, but it's not really, because like Ernie said, it's just MasterCard 2.0. Yeah, we don't have to dwell on it. This is what ended up happening as a result of all this. So now we can talk about the consequences or the ramifications of this control of the narrative, of this stifling of Bitcoin, which all started with the censorship in Reddit, Bitcoin.org, Bitcoin Talk, all of these places where people tried to express that this is not the original purpose of Bitcoin. This is what happened. Effectively, these guys won. The censors won, the controllers won, and the hijackers of Bitcoin won. That's a tragedy that I have to say that, but that's the case. But so here's what culminated as a result of this. So now that Bitcoin is more controlled, this set the stage, and this is to Ernie's point, they wanted the financialization of Bitcoin so that certain actors can make money off of it, so that it'll be more ripe for institutional investment. Because if it's just cash, that doesn't necessarily make it good for investment. And it's also questionable how much it would have went up, right? Because if people are constantly trading it, it's moving around, probably stabilizes in value a lot quicker rather than fluctuates and has so much volatility. So now that the stage is set for this, in 2017, we all saw a massive increase in Bitcoin. This is around the time that institutional actors finally got interested in the technology, and that's because it's already been fully hijacked. Now you see people over the course of the years like Michael Saylor come into the space. They're not talking about your keys, your crypto. They're not talking about the cypherpunk values. Instead, they're talking about just making money off of the technology. This is a huge problem. I go into X Spaces.
Sell your house,
bro.
Tell your children, buy more Bitcoin, make me richer. We're going to get rich, but we're not going to be free.
Instead of actually living off of Bitcoin, having a level of freedom, talking about the philosophy, the whole narrative shifted. It's all about making money. It's all about how we can YOLO into it. And this is still the case. I go into all these X Spaces all the time, and everyone's just talking about when number go up, when moon, when Lambo. These are phrases in the space, memes that just mean how can I get rich off of this? And that completely misses the point of the technology, has nothing to do with the past. And listen, I'm not a purist by any stretch of the imagination, in the sense that there is importance to making money and having more value for yourself, because there is liberty in that. But by the same token, it doesn't speak to the power and the potential of this technology to actually shift the world toward more liberty and more freedom. And one of the things that actually happened too, there were cryptocurrency companies, and this is knowledge from the ground, local knowledge. There were companies trying to spread Bitcoin as a means of exchange and trade. But what governments did, so on the back end, there was this Operation Choke Point 2.0. So what ended up happening, not only was Bitcoin censored in the way that it was supposed to function, but now all the exchange desks, all the traders, they're being censored themselves. They're being attacked. They're losing their bank accounts. I was working with Crypto Space and Ernesto. We went through 12 bank accounts just trying to run a company normally and trying to offboard people from fiat currency into crypto. And the system made it very difficult for us to operate. So what actually ended up happening, there's this concept of human capital flight or brain drain. A lot of the preeminent developers in the space, they left. They went and set up shop in Switzerland and Mexico. Ernesto ultimately went to Mexico and set up CryptoMex there, stopped running in the U.S. as a result of these activities. So this was all part, we can think about it as a conspiracy or a plan. Maybe it wasn't all perfectly put together in the minds of some.
It was a marketing campaign.
Yeah,
like you said, YOLO,
yep.
You only live once.
Yeah.
That's what it stands for. Yeah, you got to be careful with these acronyms, man. So this has been a campaign. It's a political campaign. Just want you to understand that.
That's right. And of course, now this all reached a fever pitch too recently, where if anybody was trying to actually develop the tools, this is important. If they were trying to develop the tools for actual peer-to-peer cash, for actual privacy, for actual anonymity, two things would happen. One, if it's a cryptocurrency, and one example is Monero, that has more privacy, that has more cash-like features, those currencies were deplatformed from the exchange space. So even if they were being used by people, they were blocked off from the institutional components of crypto, and now you couldn't even use them in an exchange anymore, because they actually did have privacy preserving cypherpunk-based features that are now completely considered. They're either banned, deplatformed, and the narrative now is these are the technologies for criminals in the criminal class. Forget about your civil liberties, forget about your freedom, forget about being able to actually transact in the currencies you want to use, because now we're trying to make them as seem as evil and as bad and nefarious as possible, so now no one can use them. So this,
like, nobody used pallets of cash. I mean, you know.
right. Well, yeah, that's part of that. The good point. That's part of the irony, of course. Still, the most used currency for financial fraud, for illicit activity, for quote unquote money laundering is fiat currency, is the US dollar. And as a matter of fact, and I talk about this on the Spaces a lot, some of the most corrupt actors in finance have been the banks, right? We know that HSBC was involved in some of the biggest money laundering schemes with their partners in the cartel. And of course, those guys only get a slap on the wrist. If you're a cryptocurrency developer and you try to develop privacy tools,
life.
Yep. Yeah. So, you know, we could always get it. You know, we get into Ian Freeman, Tornado Cash guys, Samurai. Well, anybody developing for freedom-based purposes, they have come after. And now what's happened recently, of course, is you see this idea that the Trump administration is defending crypto, the idea that they want to protect developers, and so they selectively threw a few breadcrumbs out to people, right? They let Ross out. Oh, great. We all support that. That's a good thing to have happened, but they selectively engineered this to make it look like they're supportive of crypto, right? What about Roger? Roger hasn't received a pardon, right? What about the Samurai Wallet guys? Those guys didn't get a pardon. So it's only if it benefits their needs as an administration, as a government, will they do it. But at the end of the day, it's all still about controlling the narrative and controlling the direction of crypto, making sure it stays institutionalized, and make sure the freedom of the component stays controlled. So it's all a big show, right? It's theatrics. It's the idea that, oh, we're supporting Bitcoin, but not really. What we're trying to support is control of the population, and we're trying to weaponize the technology against the people. This is something that really frustrates me, because so many people they're completely lost on the fact of what's happening. And a good friend of mine talks a lot about this. I recommend following his work. I don't know if he's been on your show or not, but Aaron Day has been one of the most outspoken people.
Aaron Day and I are working closely on the Xano project. You know,
that's right.
Right.
So, man, I know you get as riled up as I do about this, but this is the case of the situation. They want to bring in a stablecoin standard that is just really a central bank digital currency in disguise, right? Everyone was under the impression, you know, Trump passed literally, you can't make this shit up, the Anti-CBDC Act, with its idea that CBDCs would be illegal, that banks can't actually so that's really just a bait and switch, because a stablecoin is in some ways worse than a CBDC, because now it brings in the technocratic corporate engineers to roll out cryptocurrencies that they can control with their government partners. But they tricked a bunch of the new Bitcoiners, new people coming into the space, that this is pro Bitcoin, and we're gonna rally behind the cryptocurrency industry, and we're gonna bring this to the masses. But it's a super controlled, highly built out. It's like building the prison walls of the financial control panopticon up around us, and that's a way that Aaron describes it as well. And I highly agree with that. So I know we can get into this if you want, Ernie, or you can elaborate on it more. But this is really easy, I think, for people to think that, oh, we're kind of fucked. This is a black pill. There's nothing we can do. But I want to be very clear that development and work in the cypherpunk areas, in the real cryptocurrency ecosystem, in the libertarian mind space, has not stopped. There are plenty of us who want to see. You mentioned Xano. I mentioned the Monero community. There's plenty of us that want to move the dial toward freedom, and we want to ensure that people understand how to use cryptocurrency to protect themselves. A lot of self-education comes into this, so you have to understand what actually works for you, what can work for you, and what can help you achieve. I use cryptocurrency every single day for something. I mentioned kind of in sort of a calm, playful way that I play games online. I'm a bit of a gamer, and like you mentioned before, Ernie, I'm a nerd, so I use cryptocurrency, and I use privacy-centric coins to play these games. I buy gift cards. I use methods for privacy, to enhance my privacy, and to use crypto the way it was originally intended. I also recommend that you guys go out there and you follow Joel from the Dash community. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, Ernie. You should have him on your show if you haven't. But his whole thing is, how can we use crypto in an everyday fashion for the way it was originally intended? He's also highly skeptical of the Bitcoin ecosystem, and he has all of these tools and all of these technologies that he shares with people in a very palatable and digestible way, so they can get into crypto and they can have your grandma just button, Ernie, so they can use crypto in ways that are useful and beneficial with their lives, but without sacrificing themselves at the altar of the state apparatus. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So we don't have to be black-pilled. We can be clear-pilled, and we can understand that there are people in the space who care about freedom and who care about the direction that we're going. And we're happy to get into more of that as well, because it's going to be a vital part of this discussion. That we're in a bad spot, but it's not that bad. I think more than ever, this is important. Whenever you have an action from government to try to control a space, you have an equal and opposite reaction from people who care. And I think privacy and anonymity as an idea and as important is moving to the forefront of a lot of the cultural discussions that we're having, because people realize now that everything that they're doing, their data, their information, their personally identifying information, is all circulating so freely. So this goes well beyond just crypto. We understand, a lot of people understand now that governments are constantly surveilling them, that nothing is safe, and that we need to prioritize the importance of privacy as much as possible. And this all goes back to the cypherpunk discussions and the history that we talked about. Even if people aren't really aware of it from an intellectual and historical perspective, they now know that privacy has to be one of the most fundamental aspects of their lives, and we just have to keep educating people. You know, there's this meme that goes around that, you know, if you don't have anything to hide, you know, why worry? But everyone has something to hide. Everyone has some element of their lives that want to be private. We don't go to the restrooms and expect that the door is going to stay open, right? There's an understanding that there's private components of our lives and there's public components of our lives, and we want to be able to preserve that privacy when necessary. We're not criminals. That's the thing. They try to paint us all as criminals if we want to remain private. That's not the case. And this is, I won't go on the tangent, but this is also why we have to push back against this notion that all of our financial transactions should be open to the public. And that's absolute nonsense. And that's why I've been a firm antagonist toward anything the government does to enhance KYC, that's Know Your Customer, or AML, anti-money laundering laws. And anybody in the space will tell you that those don't do any good. They don't stop criminality. We see this, you know, billions of dollars in illicit financial products and funds are flowing through the financial infrastructure right now. So we got to continue to do everything we can to push back against these typical ideas. And one last thing, the thing that the cryptocurrency ecosystem has started to do now is to create more parallel institutions and more parallel structures to help push back against this. And of course, this has reached its pinnacle or its crescendo in the cyber state and the network state movement, which now we're concerned not only with financial institutions being parallelized, but also our governance institutions, our whole societies. And Ernie has worked in this. I know we're working our way up to this part of the conversation as well. But the big main point is that we don't have to be black-pilled. There are solutions, and I'm glad that you're here, Ernie, and you've been helping educate people. You're a great model for this. You've built your website up using tools and technologies that help decentralize it, that help prevent censorship, and that's why we're all here. It's not to instill fear, but it's to instill hope and optimism and clear pills that there is a path forward. So that's one thing I really want to emphasize.
Thank you. The solution. You mentioned Aaron Day. Aaron is he actually lives on crypto since like 19 or something. He just uses crypto because he can. And it used to be a lot easier, even when they were coming after everybody and so on. It was a lot easier. I mean, you could, you know, go to a meetup and do it. They used to have a thing called on Facebook, it's like local Bitcoin or something like that, and you would just put in, like you're on Craigslist or Facebook, and say, I want to sell some crypto where I meet you, and we kind of do crypto exchange and give me money, and we're done. You know, it was, and people would go to your home. It was like Thomas Costanzo, we knew him as Morpheus. He was one of my employees for Freedom's Phoenix, one of the sales guys. And what he did is this was his business. And he liked because there was no paperwork. You know, he would go on regular monthly things to doctors, lawyers, professionals, people with money or whatever. He'd just show up. You know, he'd take some cash, he'd give him some Bitcoin. And he took a cut of, I don't know, a few percent or something. That was his business. They go, no, you're a financial institution. You're doing it wrong. You're not allowed. And you go to jail. And he did like a year and a half. A lot of these guys do a lot more. But he refused to take a plea. They want you to take it. He goes, no, I'm not doing it. I'll just serve my time. It's all good. And he wasn't rich. He was just a regular guy, found a way to make a living, you know, just paying his bills and so on, helping disperse crypto, which there was an infrastructure for doing this. No, you're competing with the banks. You mentioned Ian Freeman. Ian Freeman, Free Talk Live, on a couple of hundred Terran stations advocating for this. And from that show, when we were on the Liberty Radio Network, the show we had on that they had created. So we've been years on that and stayed with them no matter how much the FBI and everybody went after them. No, I'm not stopping. No, you just do your worst. This is where Roger Ver learned of crypto and Bitcoin and how he became stinking filthy rich, is because he understood the philosophical aspects of it. Because he had been trading on eBay, selling, you know, these bird scare fireworks or whatever, munitions, because he was in California going up against the man, running for office, whatever. Oh, hell no, we got to get this guy in jail, make him a felon. So this is how he understood the system we were up against. It was a freedom thing. It was a philosophical thing. It was reading, you know, Mises and Rothbard and libertarian philosophy, Ron Paul, all this kind of stuff. So when the Levolution started in 2008, we, for the first time, had the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor reserve, and they go, we need some more money. We're getting the stable coins and all this kind of stuff and how they're, you know, it's going bad. And during all of this, we understood the Federal Reserve for the first time had become a presidential candidate issue with Dr. Paul to explain to people all of these wars, all of this freedom sucking up Uncle Sam stuff that was going on was banks. And you need to understand how the Federal Reserve is really working, how they got all this debt, how it's never going to get paid back, how, you know, your income tax is just to pay the interest on the debt, if that. I mean, it's just enormous revelation of how our system really worked and enslaved us. Immediately after the 2008 campaign, it was like 2009 that we started hearing about it, and then, you know, 10, back when Bitcoin was, I don't know, pennies, people were mining it on their laptops and so on. What happened is that it was the people's money. This is what we've been talking about. This is freedom from the system. Well, the system don't like that. And this is when it started, when we started covering it. That's why you go to Bitcoin categories on Freedom to Declare Your Independence. We have different categories there. You go on the page, and it'll say by shows by topic and shows by guest name. Well, we have a ton of them. And from the beginning, we have been covering this. Now, as an old guy, activist, I knew exactly what was going to happen. They cannot allow freedom down, decentralized to the individual, which is what Bitcoin originally was for. Because when the financial crash happened in 2007, it was obvious what was coming. 2008, 9 to 11, whoa, damn, the people came up with a solution. Bitcoin. Cryptocurrencies. We don't want a solution. We need a great reset, you know? Well, we'll use Bitcoin and make it a central bank digital currency thing, and then we'll really surveil everybody. This is what happened. When Roger wrote the book, Hijacking Bitcoin, read the book, and it was a lot of the highlights like what you're talking about, but he didn't go into the details of, you know, he named names, but he didn't go into the nuances of what was really going on a lot of times behind each of these things. I mean, hell, it was a book, you know, you can only put so much in. But the it is an attack by they, them, those. Could it be Satan? I mean, it's evil. When I go freedom, good government, bad, 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 bad. What am I saying? Bad guys doing bad stuff that they know is bad. That is the definition of evil. It's not good, I can tell you that. So we're up against evil. Just saying.
Oh yeah, so I've had a lot of opportunities to speak with Roger and get his thoughts on the whole thing, and he definitely retains this mindset, which we all agree with, that this was going to definitely had a capacity to go in a really awful direction, simply because you're right, Ernie, what we're talking about is the notion that governments don't want to see this happen. They don't want to see radical decentralization. They want to make sure they control the narrative. And this is exactly why it went this direction. And even though Roger put as much of his money and his energy and his time and his enthusiasm into defending the original use case and impetus behind the technology, it's very difficult to fight back against a system that's so geared and, of course, originated around the notion of control. It's tremendously difficult to fight back against that. So it really does require strong-willed personalities and individuals who are open to going out there and pushing back. And this is why we've also mentioned all of our friends who have gotten tied up in this. It's because they took their philosophies and their ideas to the limit. The case with Ian, we can get into a little bit. Those guys were all originally just trying to do cryptocurrency trades in a free fashion, in a way that was as legal as, quote unquote, legal as possible. But it really doesn't matter, because the government, if they can even create a story or manufacture a story that paints you in a bad light, they're just going to use that to go after you. That's the issue with laws and government regulations and rules anyway. They can selectively apply those to the people that they want. Governments constantly break laws and constantly act as the criminals all the time, but there's always some exception that they can have for themselves, right? There's this, diplomatic immunity that police have, and the same kind of immunity applies to politicians as well. They can just go out there and do what they want and not have to face any repercussions. But if we try to do things that are related to freedom, even if we're not hurting anybody at all, they make it a point to still use the narrative to control the fact that control the messaging around that, to suggest that this is evil, when really it's the opposite case, as you so eloquently pointed out there. It's a real tragedy that's the way that the system has ironed itself out. But again, I'm so happy that there's so many of us that are doing our best to fight back against this. And I personally still have hope that Roger is going to have his case ultimately dismissed. He seems very optimistic, and I think we're all here optimistic as well. And by the way, something that folks should know about Roger's case is that one of the main issues here, they were so bold in their attempt to go after him that what they did was they raided his attorney's office in order to try to collect materials to go after him. And this is a direct breach of attorney-client confidentiality. So that's been one of the major points that they're making in their case. I think they actually submitted a motion to dismiss, but the case getting pushed back. But I think we're going to have an opportunity to see Roger let free. That's my hope. But yeah, man, okay, so maybe now's a good chance.
Hey,
for me
he's
to start.
not incarcerated. He is out on whatever. He can't leave Spain or something. He went to a conference in Spain, got him, and it was just a couple weeks after he came on the show, and we did the release of his book, Hijacking Bitcoin, and I'm like, man, you in trouble now. Well, he was in trouble, and he's very supportive of these other opportunities, because he's got resources. He can do what the hell he wants, but that's the problem. They were, okay, I got to tell this story so that you understand. When Jeff Berwick started Anarchapulco, a decade ago or something, in Acapulco, Mexico, they had a conference that was, just a bunch of anarchists, and and certainly crypto was a thing. At that first meeting, of course, there's feds everywhere, spot the Fed. I mean, you could, they bring in the people. And one thing that they were concerned about the most is two things. One, are you paying taxes on this newfound, you making a bunch of, how you doing the IRS? How IRS? People go around talking, meeting, buddying you up. You get your, hot Amerasian chick representing the man, squeezing your bicep. Ooh, you must lift. You're so smart. Have dinner with me. I'm like, wow. Then Luke Radowski comes up. I'm talking to her at one of the party things, and he goes, well, Ernie, she won. I go, won what? Oh, spot the Fed, you win. And I'm going, man, if you keep outing all the hot Asian chicks, then they'll stop sending them. I go, damn, quit outing everybody all the time. I'm sitting here getting all this information. But the other thing that they were worried about, it was after the Levolution with Dr. Ron Paul. And they were like, all you rich crypto people now, who are you going to be backing for campaigns in 12? What about Rand Paul? What about? What were they afraid of? That people had resources to do things, which is what's happening now. This is exactly what those feared, is that then Patrick Byrne gets up. He starts doing, all kinds of different blockchain solutions to all kinds of problems. I remember him telling me, we just had him on, a couple months ago, and what happened was, I remember he was releasing, we were in Barbados, and we had this big whiteboard. We had 167 industries that were going to be totally disrupted with blockchain technology. Everything from insurance, contracts, real estate. Well, I mean, it was a thing. And those are hell no. We created this entire infrastructure, not just on financial transactions, but everything linked to financial transactions, and you're not allowed to break free. Damn it. That is the philosophy behind this. And Roger understood it. So he goes in. What other name I wanted to bring up, I used to have on quite a bit, I had a lot of respect for, was Eric Voorhees. Eric Voorhees really understood, the reason for this, and he would always go out and, offer services that was bypassing a lot of this. And then it finally, he's still around, but he's kind of gone more low key. What happened to Eric?
Yeah, so couple of things. One is, in the early days when he saw that things were going south, he had originally had a company and a platform called Shapeshift, which was a cryptocurrency exchange. And then he relocated the company from the US to Crypto Valley in Switzerland. And then I don't know the details of what ended up happening to Shapeshift. I'm pretty sure it's still active, but recently he's been working. It wasn't long ago, Ernie, I think a year or so ago, he did a really amazing keynote where he pointed out a lot of the problems in the space, and he's still talking about freedom and liberty. But one of the major things that he's focusing on right now, he's really involved in the artificial intelligence space, but he's I think Morpheus AI, which is a AI-based platform. I think it's tokenized, so it has a cryptocurrency component, and it's trying to decentralize artificial intelligence. Anyway, that's what Eric's working on right now, but I haven't had any personal conversations with him in a while. You are right. He certainly seems to have gone a bit more low-key. I haven't seen him out at as many events as I used to. So that's my guess. But yeah, he's always been an advocate for freedom. He hailed from the New Hampshire-based libertarians, and that's really where he came from. And he was in on it as early as Roger was, and was at some of those early meetings. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm looking up Morpheus AI. I don't know if this is what you're talking about here.
Let's see. I don't think that's it, or that's some. Give me a second.
Yeah, I don't see his name there, so that's not it. But the so I'm looking at getting in touch with you. Come across him, let him know Ernie wants to talk to him again. We may try and get hold of him, but he might not want to talk. Every time somebody comes up, he had like a $60,000 fine to get out of whatever, and they used a show that he and I did to get him, And I'm like, because guys like Sterlin, they come on here and they say all the stuff that they probably shouldn't say. But Sterlin is helping us out. All right, please continue.
Yeah, by the way, so the website is more.org for Morpheus AI, and I actually I was recently in Mexico City at the Radical Innovation Summit, and I spoke with David Johnson, who works very closely with Eric. So I know that Eric is doing well. He mentioned him briefly, but David is a huge proponent, by the way, of liberty. And this is the project that they're currently working on. Yeah, peer-to-peer network for general purpose AI. The idea here too is that there's more privacy in it. One of the big concerns lately about the artificial intelligence space is that everyone's giving all of their data to these companies. People are using ChatGPT, but a lot of folks don't know that anything that you input into ChatGPT now belongs to OpenAI, right? It belongs to GPT, Sam Altman, etc. So we have to figure out ways to decentralize and to privatize our AI use as well. And this is all part of this narrative. So this is another technology, by the way, that governments have a tremendous concern about, because AI technologies, if used by certain actors, can actually be used quite effectively to push back against the system. Not only is it leverage for knowledge, but you can now use AI to build technologies and platforms by itself. So the tool has a tremendous use case for people to push back against control systems. But of course, just like any other technology, the system engineers can also use it to control our activities. So there's a great amount of people who have either worked in blockchain, but who also understand the cypherpunk movement, who are deeply interested in AI, decentralizing AI, and keeping it private. So that's definitely worth mentioning.
I want to, since we got time, and I can interrupt all I want. No. It was just a couple of weeks ago that, think of this. I grew up, I'm like 6, 7 years old, Star Trek comes out. 2001 Space Odyssey. Star Wars, I'm like a junior high school. Then you have, all this stuff. The mindset was computer. I want to know what, we're about there now. I ask any question. I use, do search. Any search goes on AI anyway. But I'm out here on the land. I need to know some math thing. The area of and the volume kind and how many bags of this and the yield of guy you need. And it goes, the answer is 42. Okay, so this is, what I need to use kind of AI for. But it's also can build web pages. It can provide complex answers to data of whatever. And I saw this. I don't know how I came across it, but there was a guy that goes on, he goes, okay, and he uses a lot of, tech stuff. But this was his project. I want to build the most efficient wing, the most efficient body, flying wing body drone to have the most, like Adderall. You have, Lucky Palmer out there being, super geek guy, and all of a sudden now he's military industrial complex of look how I can make all these drone planes, and he's got a big contract with Trump administration of whatever. He was the guy that created the Oculus Rift that, those bought through Facebook for a couple of $1 billion. Now he's off into military industrial complex. But what this guy did is he goes, all right, I want the most efficient. I can 3D print this wing, put in controls for it, and it had the least amount of energy to fly the furthest, the longest. And he went through how he went through AI to get the best design, and then it come up with a 3D print, created an STL file, put it in a 3D printer, printed it out. He had a bunch of different parameters they put in. Here's the most efficient. Boom. 3D prints it, flies it, done. That was decades of work. This is like skunkworks kind of stuff, creating the SR-71 kind of thing. That now artificial intelligence has gone down to the hobbyist at your desktop manufacturing of whatever the hell you want. You just got to ask the right questions, give the right parameters, and he showed it. So it was like an hour video, and probably 3/4 of that was just the process he went through to hit a printer, and boom, it came out. Artificial intelligence, down to the people. What happens when they go, I'm saying, you're kind of using it wrong. You're not allowed. Then I just had a video we put up yesterday. They have Adderall came up with this $40,000 missile that could do blah blah. He goes, what? I can do that for $100. He took a DJI drone, put on a bunch of different kind of components, and did and showed. Boom. Same kind of thing like they're doing in Ukraine with these drones that they just created a DJI and it drops bombs and does and goes and finds and facial recognition of Slaughterbot. Yeah, you should watch the like a decade ago they had this thing called Slaughterbot, and it was kind of a TED Talky thing, and it was just them demonstrating the future of this technology to where you have these little robots go out and it has a 22 charge in it, hits you in the forehead, and you're dead because it knew who you were. This is happening now. And when this kind of technology is able to get into decentralized and into the hands of the people, then what? They got a 50 gazillion, variable front coming at them, just like they did with cryptocurrency. So I'm just saying, this artificial general intelligence is here, and they, them, those got it. But what happens when we go noded? It's the people, the network of all their computers, parallel processing in the network of a decentralized node of we can do it, and we have the power of they, them, those. This is what they're trying. They can't stop it. They can't stop it, but they can curtail it. And what you look into the future, you want to see what the future is, it's what's rewarded and what's punished. You get more of what you reward and subsidize and less of what you punish. But it doesn't go away. This is what's coming, just saying.
Absolutely. And what's going to happen, just like the social engineers and the bureaucrats and the politicians will continue to do, is attempt to control the narrative. They'll attempt to control the fringes and the edges. They're not going to be able to stop the technology. You know, once the cat's out of the bag, there's nothing that they can do to stop it. But what they can do is try to control the edges. They can also continue to collect our data. You know, Ernie, that's actually a really important topic. One of the biggest threats, I think, against our freedom, generally speaking, is the fact that the social engineers have full control to access our data, to get our personally identifiable information, to keep that warehoused in ways that they control it. So one of the things that we really need, and this is speaking to the solution space, is decentralized data storage protocols. We need to stop whatever we can. We need to do whatever we can from our end to curtail data warehouse. Right now, most people don't know that all of our data, a good chunk of our data, is managed and maintained by the likes of Google, by Amazon, and these are now vast honeypots. The storage method that they use is called replication, where they just basically take your data and they put it on another server elsewhere. But this doesn't stop people from gaining access to it. It doesn't stop the users, or it doesn't stop the administrators of these warehouses from accessing it. It doesn't stop them from giving it to governments. And so we have a problem. This is a massive gap in the libertarian technology space that we need to fill. And there's a number of different organizations that are trying to do what they can to decentralize our data storage capacities, but it's a from a tech perspective and also an economic perspective, a really hard problem to solve, because you have to have a way to be able to audit that data in order to keep it encrypted and private. And you also have to have a marketplace of storage providers that manages economies of scale, right? Because it's very easy for somebody like Amazon just to plug in a node to one of these networks and then just become the controller. So the incentives have to be just perfect. And just to give you a couple of examples of organizations that are working on this, one of them is called Codex. I forget the website, maybe codex.io. Yeah, it slips my mind at the moment. But there's also organizations like Filecoin and a number of different people who are building the technology stack to decentralize data storage. But until we do that, what we really are dealing with, and this is critical, is decentralization theater. We have a bunch of people out there in the cryptocurrency space that constantly applaud and they congratulate and they sing paeans to the fact that we're decentralized, when the reality is that a lot of our front ends, a lot of the Web3 wallets have threat vectors or points of attack related to the fact that all the servers and all the elements of the data are connected to these centralized honeypots. So this is a massive use case for governments right now and institutions to control us. You know, we may not agree with her premises, but there's a book that I'm a huge fan of that makes a really good point. It's called Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, and probably the better term would have been surveillance corporatism. But what she claims is that our data is so accessible to different entities and governments that what they're starting to do is they're packaging this data up, and then they're auctioning it on the open market for in real time as you browse and you engage online to different kinds of corporations and to governments who pay the higher fee. And this is what she referred to as a behavioral future. You see, they're selling our futures, our behaviors, our psychologies on the open market. And this is important because what this means is we already see they're using this this data and this information to power their, back to AI, to power their algorithms, to power their LLMs, to take advantage of us, and so they really know what we're going to do. They can try to anticipate. This is like predictive policing. They can anticipate what our next moves are going to be, what products we're going to buy, what we're interested in. So they're really building our behavioral profiles based on these futures that they're accumulating. This is worse than Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon. This is like, Huxley's Brave New World, right, where everyone is like, they're comatose by the soma that's being spread around, the different kinds of ways to put us to sleep, right? All these psychiatric drugs, all these narratives, all these news cycles. It's a way to keep us numb to the fact that we're just becoming puppets in their puppet show. So the only way to solve this is to have truly decentralized data storage mechanisms. If not, we're just talking in circles. We're not addressing the elephant in the room and the core of the problem. One of the reasons we're so happy, the thing that goes under the surface, one of the reasons we're so happy about decentralized money technologies is this doesn't represent decentralized transactionality and financial freedom. It represents an element of data freedom, right? Because ultimately all that's in a block, these transactions, that's also data related to your personal interactions. So trying to figure out ways to free the data is a way to free us. And there's another point of this. There's a technology that is imminent and that people are starting to use that helps solve this problem. You hear people talk about zero-knowledge cryptography or zero-knowledge proofs. So without getting into the technical details, this is just technology that allows people to reveal a certain amount of information, right, without revealing the rest of the data or the rest of the information. So this technology is primarily talked about in the context of privacy. Imagine, let me give you an example. You go to a club, like a bar, and you have to present your ID to get in, and your ID, of course, has a bunch of personally identifiable information. But imagine if you could prove your age, right, without having to reveal any of that information. You can prove it because you have a zero-knowledge proof. You're proving, or you're validating that personally identifying information without giving any of it up. So this is how people think about zero-knowledge cryptography and privacy. But what they don't know is that zero-knowledge cryptography also allows us to do different kinds of proof compression for these data storage protocols. Because here's the key. Whenever you have large stores of data that you want to remain encrypted and private and censorship resistant, there is a lot of computational power that goes into that activity. And so one way to minimize that activity is to be able to prove that all that data exists and is structured properly and is correct, is using these zero-knowledge proofs. So now we have the technology on a fundamental level with cryptographic primitives to allow us to decentralize data. And I'm glad we're getting into this, because I can't express how critical it is that we have this decentralized data storage protocols in place to help contribute to more freedom. Because right now, Shoshana Zuboff is correct. And one other thing I want to mention that's important to this story and for context, we saw this happen in real time. You guys remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So what happened in the scandal is that Brittany Kaiser, I don't know if she's been on your show yet or not, she was a whistleblower at Cambridge Analytica, where she came out and said that Facebook was using all of our data. They were selling all of our data to the government, and they were using it to craft a political narrative and to try to control people's votes, right? To try to get them to vote.
No, they wouldn't do that. That'd be wrong.
Right? That would be absolutely. So the issue here, of course, is that we're constantly giving all of our data to these centralized entities that then we're using them as a behavioral future to sell off to different
Palantir
organization. Yeah, Palantir. This goes right into the tech. We can talk about technocracy, and we can talk about how it emerges as it's all about data. Data is the currency of the future. It's the currency that governments use to commodify the individual and the human being. It's a way to really arrest our spirits and our humanity. So figuring out how we push back against that, cryptocurrency, truly decentralized cryptographic protocols for financial transactions and for human transactions is important, but it's also about our individual data that gets uploaded as our spirit into these warehouses. How do we fight back against that and push back against it, it's by decentralizing data. And I think this is really what, back to Eric Voorhees, back to Morpheus AI, this is why it's really important that we free up the usage of AI and we decentralize AI, we keep AI private, because this is becoming more and more of a concern as we move into what looks like to be a more technocratic future unless we take charge and we really rekindle the cypherpunk spirit.
You know, one of the things that I really would advocate for is technocracy.news is Patrick Wood, that, you know, he's my age, probably older, you know, he's maybe 70 something, but he's spry and got it going on. And he was the one that outed in the 70s, you know, this Trilateral Commission thing. He goes, he could see all this Wall Street going on. Everybody's overlapping board of directors of controlling the planet of whatever. He's like, what the crap? So Professor Hutton and the Hoover Institute and they publish a book. It goes on Larry King. It's a big deal. Oh, the Trilateral, they're doing what? And then you go try and buy the book, and they bought all the publishers, and it's not printed anymore, and you don't have it. It sold 70,000 copies in right away, and then it's gone. And you go, what the crap? Well, he lives here in Arizona. We became friends. We have him on quite a bit. The people that have yet to really pick up on the who and the how and the what and all that, they say you're a conspiracy nut right up until, you know, it all turns out to be true. And it's the Mises Institute, the Mises guys. I mean, we know these guys: Ron Paul, Lou Rockwell, you know, Tom Woods kind of crowd, Jeff Deist, you know, Stephan Kinsella. I mean, all these guys. They really need to be talking more with Patrick Woods, and I think this is part of the story that they need to, you know, I'll make an effort on that. I think, you know, we'll do that. But while you were talking, you know, here, I'll turn on the video. I was saving, you know, bandwidth here. But I wanted to show this. You know, the audience was looking at this right now. This is out. What's today's date? This is Thursday, the 25th of September. So this is yesterday. Every United Kingdom working adult will need BRIC card, digital ID under Starmer plan to tackle something. Whether it's, oh yeah, illegal immigration, the boat people. It's we got to have your card. You know, we just want to know what kind of American are you. You know, so this is the you think it's not coming? It's coming. It's here. It always starts in the empire of, and then here we go. And then what happens? You know, what's Trump's view on this stuff? Of course, man. And then what do they need to do this? I want to talk about this part a little bit. What they need is they need a shit ton of power. They need a whole bunch of electrons to power all of these data centers, the crypto mining. They're seeing that it's sucking up our energy resource. Well, they haven't decentralized it. It's always big. What you can't have nuclear. You know, will they be fusion? Can you have these small reactors that you can put in the Amazon, you know, headquarters of whatever and do my data? Well, Trump comes out and says, look, you want to have these big data centers? Why don't you just make your own damn power plant? And then you can sell it, whatever extra you got on. We'll approve that. Okay, cool. Good idea. Decentralized power. Let's do that. And then what do you find out? We're starting to find out that they're not building it. You are. You look on your electric bill and all of a sudden you got a surcharge of it went up a lot to build these power plants for them, for the banking system, for the surveillance grid, for the whoa, what the crap? And they get to build it on their land? You know, I'm like, man, who are you people? This is what's going on. So what happens when you decentralize this? What happens when it's nodes like we do IPFS? This show, initially, we have created a mechanism by which all of this goes onto our own private server that is then networked a bunch of gazillion, millions, however many nodes there are, take a look and see how many there are now, of these nodes around the world so that this data cannot be censored, it can't be edited, and it can't be deleted. It is like there forever and always, amen. Now the thing is that those don't like that. But we use that as the core of our data. Then we put it on the platforms. We just started going back on YouTube. The reason was we were at the Ron Paul 90th birthday party, which you were there. It was good to see you. You know, there was a lot of pushback in the beginning. You know, on me, I'd go to Anarchapulco and I'd say, here comes Ernie. Everybody take a shot of whiskey every time he says IPFS. You know, I'm going, you guys, you know, because I could see the shadow banning in '09. They were going after, they certainly go after Freedom's Phoenix and Ernie. You know, you create the Ron Paul Levolution thing, man. They definitely don't like that, you know, so they were coming. And I could see that we'd have YouTubes that we'd done and put up, and we'd get thousands of downloads, and YouTube says, yeah, 400. Yeah, it was downloaded 5. You lying sacks of crap, okay? I could see it coming. Well, now they're saying, come on back in, the water's fine. You know, we were at Ron Paul's party, and a lot of the influencers and everything, you know, our good friend Luke Radowski, you know, We Are Change. He, you know, he's a favorite of Donna. She's always watching his stuff, and we're posting his stuff and everything. He's a good friend. But he can't say certain words. Can't say COVID. It's cornholio disease. I mean, you know, this kind of crap. Well, then COVID comes through, and people were saying, nope, you're not allowed. Well, what happens is Google, Biden administration made us do it. We're really, you know, first do no evil was their slogan, and they took that down a decade ago. We're saying, we're evil now, so I guess we can't say that anymore. So what they did is they said, come on back in. We started loading up show immediately. Oh, I'm sorry. That's misinformation. You're not allowed to talk about whatever it was that, you know, somebody I had on saying something. It was innocuous stuff, stupid stuff. To think they're not censoring now is a lie. It's just COVID, because it's been proven they're lying sacks of snot. So I'm going, this is not going away. And now that we got in, you know, I think Trump says, you know, I changed my mind. I think Ukraine can take back all of their territory and put, you know, NATO can put Russia in its place and whatever, and we're not going to give them arms, but we'll sell them to the European Union, and they give them to Ukraine. You want to do that? Knock yourself out. But we're going, and then they just reneged on that. Well, we can't afford it, and we can't. I guess you're going to have to do it. I'm telling you, it's all lies. Lie. If we have a decentralized node down to the individual, it's there on your desktop, which is what is possible, and we have been pimping that for a long time, years we've been using this, because it bypasses all this. To think that I go, ones and zeros. I need to store them. I need to have access to them. How hard is this? All you geeks, get on it, man. Waiting on you now. Well, Derek Slopey, our IT guy, goes, Ernie, I think this IPFS thing is what you've been talking about years ago. And we developed the interface. Now all our data is done. And every 12 to 24 hours, the entire site of Freedom's Phoenix is copied and put on IPFS. And the reason is because all of those stories, you go back, you know, years, a month, and you go, yeah, there was a story. I did a search. It was on Freedom's Phoenix. I do the Freedom's Phoenix search, which we need to put in AI model. This is one reason why I want to talk to Eric and their project. I need a large language model on our 600,000 entries on Freedom's Phoenix, be able to search it better, you know? So I'm going, this is what's happening. Those don't like that. You're not allowed to have this. You got to use them, pay them a fee, and they get to surveil all the stuff you're doing. Real. It's like it never stops. And who do we have? People like Sterlin to be able to explain it to us. Go ahead.
Absolutely, man. So, yeah, I think we have about an hour left. I think this is a really good point where we can get into even more of the solution space, Ernie, because I know that so just a little bit of background, you know, I'm working with Logos, and maybe I'll explain what Logos is just a bit. And I've been in the cyber state and the network state space. So Logos is actually developing the technologies to deploy novel kind of governance schemes on chain, right, that could potentially interface with people who are living in local communities to incentivize different kinds of behavior, to allow for different kinds of contractual arrangements. But one of the so there's 3 protocols here, and they have a potential to revolutionize the way that we engage online. And this is, by the way, not to just shill Logos. There's other people who are working on similar projects, but one of the ideas that comes out of this is to truly decentralize the internet. You know, this was originally Tim Berners-Lee who helped, you know, create the internet, right?
World Wide Web.
World Wide Web. One of his ideas was that this should be more decentralized, and they ended up selling out, of course. But One thing that you need is, I mentioned decentralized data storage. You also need a private peer-to-peer communication protocol, right? So Logos is developing that as well, called Waku. And then you need the governance component, which is the blockchain piece to deploy these kind of models, and it's called Nomos. And there are other people who are working on similar things, but not in not in the same structured sort of bottom-up approach that Logos is doing. But the idea that is beautiful and brilliant that comes out of these communities is the notion that we need a myriad of different parallel institutions in order to create a whole parallel society. But you have to be able to be truly decentralized and censorship resistant, because if you're not, then you can't fully realize the vision. This happens, of course, first in cyberspace and online for all the problems that we've already mentioned, but eventually this is also going to be applicable to communities that are on the ground, right? Because we don't only want to be free digitally, we also want to be free in our physical lives. That's the whole impetus behind the libertarian movement and the libertarian ethos. So what's happening around the world right now is that many different people are seeding these hubs there's a lot of different names for them. There's network state, cyber state, parallel society, internet native nation. But this is a movement that grew out of the cryptocurrency mind. And the reason it happened is because, of course, everybody now has all this crypto capital, and those who understand and realize that the Western world is starting to collapse, the Western system is faltering, they're taking advantage of this. This is a moment in time. They're saying, why don't we create our own parallel society where we can develop these tools, freedom tech, biotech, artificial intelligence, no matter what the technology is. They want a regulatory sandbox. In other words, they want more freedom to be able to develop without having bureaucrats censor them, stop them, or otherwise make it more painful. So this is why we have, so I'm speaking kind of abstractly right now, but now bringing it to the ground, these places exist right now. So you've talked about Prospera on your show. Prospera is one community. And there's, by the way, one quick caveat we can get into is there are some questions about whether these communities can become technocracy, whether they're funded by technocrats, and we'll discuss that. But I wanted to put a pin. Yeah, I want to put a pin in that. So, but a lot of the folks that are involved in this actually are libertarians. I do know a lot of the people involved in Prospera. Their minds are in the right place. We just don't want these spaces to be hijacked. And this goes back into the discussion that we had. But okay, so you have Prospera. You have Balaji started the Network School, which is a physical location in Malaysia. You have Vitalik Buterin, who started a project called Zuzalu. Zuzalu has now split up into different kinds of temporary pop-up communities called Zoo Villages. And I participated in one in Switzerland called Switzerland. But their whole mindset is they have what's called a DAC mindset, which is defensive accelerationism. In other words, they want to get into these spaces and they want to accelerate technological growth, but they want to do it in a way that's safe, that doesn't roll out the prison walls around us, and that allows technologists to work in a protective bubble where they don't have to deal with bureaucracy.
Ah, man.
So this is something that's not happening in isolation. This movement is growing rapidly. This is a shelling point. It's an elephant in the room. It's not something that enough people are focused on right now. So this is the space that I got interested in working in, because I see it as the future of not only technological development, but also rearranging our governance modalities. In other words, how we live together, how we interact. And I want to be clear about this. So people hear me say governance. Oh, Sterlin might be talking about government, or it might be facilitating technocracy. So there's a difference between governance and government. Government is that if I'm to use the Rothbardian definition, it's that group of individuals who have a monopoly of force over a territorial region. So that's government. Governance is just the mechanisms, the incentives, the cooperation algorithms.
Yeah, they're rules. They're just not rulers.
That's right. That we opt into voluntarily, and usually these communities that have these rules are people who share our values, who have a similar culture, who spread similar memes, and who share our principles. So this is they're key difference between governance and government. So I think we all have an understanding that if we move into a group or a community, if we opt into it, especially if we're going to live with those people physically, that there should be a sharing of values. And that's something that more and more people are gravitating to. You know, something that a lot of libertarians don't talk about is all these problems that we're discussing around liberty, all these problems around government have also exacerbated a greater problem, a greater threat that we have to actually, it's a multitude of threats. It's what Daniel Schmachtenberger called the meta-crisis or the poly-crisis. So now, whether we agree with the individual truth of each crisis, we are certainly in an interesting transitory period in the human species and our relationship with not only our planet, but our institutions. Okay, here we are with technology. We have the possibility for synthetic organisms to come onto the scene soon. We have AGI and the emergence of AGI on the horizon if it already doesn't exist. We have possible climatological issues that we're facing. The extent of those, of course, is debatable. We have all these institutional failures, one world governments. We have a myriad of problems, right? We could go on and continue to name them. And this has been referred to as the poly-crisis. And if we don't fix our institutional problems, not only are we continuing to impact our freedom and civil liberties negatively, but our systems, because of the way that they're structured, are actually contributing to these other second order and third order consequences and eventualities. And the reason this happens is because these institutions, when they're set up like this, when they're highly centralized, it creates a lot of zero-sum dynamics. And when I say zero-sum dynamics, this is what we refer to as game theory. So whenever incentives are skewed in these systems, people try to optimize for their own well-being at the expense of everyone else, right? This is the politician, this is the bureaucrat. What they're optimizing for is their own power, their own control. They don't care about you. This is the story of everything that you talk about on your show, Ernie. So how do we combat that? We have to fix the incentives, and the only way to be able to do that is to experiment with new ways of organizing our communities on a local level. And this also speaks to the importance of greater and greater decentralization. So these zero-sum games need to turn into more win-win dynamics. And the reason this is vital, yes, is for freedom, but we can't target down and try to control these individual crises that are all around us unless we focus down the problem of freedom, the problem of institutional failure and corruption. So we're actually on a path as a species of self-destruction and self-cannibalization. And this is why I think so many of us are so strongly and forcefully and passionately for the libertarian ethos, because it means more than our individual freedom. It means our survival as a species. This is a change that we have to make. This is a transition that we have to propel into the future. It's almost like we're being midwived from the adolescence of the human species to the adulthood of the human species. So I think we're in the midst of a very important time in the existence of our species. And really, you know, one thing that these cyber states or network states are really representative of is this idea of an attractor, right? An attractor in mathematics is an entity that a chaotic system can evolve towards, right? But that doesn't mean it's automatically going to evolve. It means that we need to take control of that particular direction. We're not automatically going to end up there. So the cyber state movement. Yeah, that's right. It's all about the incentive structures in society. We don't change those. We're going to continue to produce a society full of bureaucrats and sociopaths and kleptocrats. Having the incentive structures correct means we need to experiment with novel governance forms along with experimenting with our technology.
Okay, let me inject a couple things here. One, I wanted to show this. Here is the market value of just Bitcoin. Okay, not counting all the other cryptos there. It's over $2 trillion now. In the hands of whom? You got a lot of institutions and government, they, them, those, and whatever. But that is a whole bunch of freedom-oriented people that have this money. And what are they doing with it? What Sterlin's talking about. The incentive towards freedom. The incentives for decentralization, for alternate governance, and so on. Then we get, like we were talking about, the crypto hippies back in the day, the crypto hacker, crypto people. You talked about a parallel society. This is Paul Rosenberg. He was, Sterlin 20, 30 years ago. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. I'm 64 years old. I started in the late 80s. This has been the goal for libertarian-minded people since for freaking ever. Then you have, the shows that we've done recently here. Here's Joyce Brand. Joyce Brand, Free Cities, the Zetas, what you were talking about. These are free cities. Honduras has been doing a lot of stuff. There's a lot of examples. But whenever you have an example of this, those got to go after you. You're not allowed to make it work, So what do? Go to Mars? I mean, what we got to do here? Out in the ocean floor, space station, go 62 miles straight up and you're free. Because 100 kilometers up, government jurisdiction goes away, except they're going to have some ion cannon and explain it to you. But, this is what the goals are. You're talking about the incentives. Who's providing those incentives? Freedom-oriented people that got crypto rich. That's who. People like Eric, like Roger, like Sterlin, like Aaron, like a lot. These are the people that I want to associate with. I want to give a use case for. This is what we provide. I go, look, I got a use case for you. Occupy the land, man. I'm out in the middle of. So this is the kind of thing that you're talking about, and I'm giving you real-world examples of this is what happens. In 2009, I think it was about 2009, it was right after the revolution of 2008, this is where Satoshi Nakamoto comes out with the white paper, kind of people money. A bunch of people understood exactly what was going on, what the possibilities were, where we're going. Then you have AI. Then you have decentralized network of power your own freaking computer and be part of a node. This is what happened. When Bitcoin first started getting going by 13 or something, the processing power for mining that people had into the network was like 30 times all the processing power of Google. I mean, this is, man, you decentralize stuff, guess what happens? This. So they have to do what's called FUDDing. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's just a psychological manipulation warfare of they, them, those, and the media, whatever, which is why they had to censor. Anybody that talks anything, they get control of all the hubs of information. If you think, well, we're going to use Signal. We have encrypted. You think they don't know what Signal is? Well, but Telegram, you think I'm all about public-see. Privacy is a good thing, but I'm about public-see, that I get the public gets to see it. If you don't have free speech, all that privacy stuff doesn't even matter, So this is what's happening. Why we're having Sterlin on explaining it to us. This is not over. This battle is ongoing big time. And that is what at that first in Acapulco, I remember all the Spot the Fed people, they were concerned of what freedom-oriented, minded, revolutionary people were going to do with all-day money. So they had to co-opt them. They had it, and I wanted to bring this up. You were at the Bitcoin conference where Ross Ulbricht spoke in Las Vegas just a couple months ago. And we were there at an invitation to them, and it was sad. A lot of people that I love, I could name names, a lot of people that's been on the show, but they got sucked in. You go to a Bitcoin conference, you're not welcome if you're not a maximalist. You're not welcome if you're not standing up and ovation, clapping as hard as you can for Michael Saylor saying, go into debt, sell your house, buy some Bitcoin, get Bitcoin for your mom, your dad, your kids, your grandkids. You just need more, because it's going to make me rich. You just keep doing that. I'm going to get you richer. This centralization effort of what's going on has nothing to do with the original intent and popularity of it was. That's gone. So they've pushed out everybody else into these little projects all over. Something's going to take off. It's going to be a Argentina moment, a Malay kind of we're totally crypto kind of thing. El Salvador is starting to do that. The Bukele or there's little parts of whoa. Need to get back with the program. We'll forgive your IMF debt, or we'll do this, or we'll shoot you, or whatever the hell. They can't have what Sterlin's talking about. But it doesn't matter because, like you say, there are incentives out there. Why? It was what they were afraid of. Freedom-oriented people with the resources that understand what is really important and why they're going after Roger Ver. How far off am I?
Yeah, you nailed it. No matter so, and this is really what drove people to especially in crypto to start thinking about what can we do with this capital? How can we achieve some degree of freedom, even if they're not as so. There's at least a number of folks that are in this so-called network state space who may not be as radical libertarian as, say, someone like you and I are, Ernie, but they do understand that things have gotten so bad that they can't even run their business the way that they want to in the U.S. So what they're wanting to do to solve that problem is then go to these locations. You mentioned the ZA and Prospera. What these are, I can elaborate on this a little bit. What these are referred to as special economic zones. Special economic zones are these geographical territories that are rolled out as special legal jurisdictions within a country, and usually they have massive tax advantages, regulatory advantages. Some even have a kind of craft your own rule set or craft your own law component to them, and that was the case of Prospera's ZA, which is a zone of economic employment and development. So these are areas that are very open to technologists and innovators to come in and work. But I do want to be clear that these aren't a way for us to develop or create a utopia. And for all intents and purposes, it's still been very difficult for people to come into these spaces and to work unencumbered because there's still the local governments they have to contend with. A good example is Prospera, where there was a regime change recently, and the government has done a lot to try to push back against their activities. They actually want to try to oust them, but the way that the Prosperans ironed out the original contract when they got set up has made it actually really difficult for the government of Honduras to kick them out. But this is always going to be a problem, and this speaks to what you're saying, Ernie. The more that we go into these different spaces, the more that we're pushing for different kinds of freedoms, especially to innovate and to build technologies, there's going to be people who want to try to control that for various reasons. Governments are notorious at doing this. But the thing that we have working for us right now, and this is really important, we haven't talked on this, is this geopolitical issue that there's a lot of countries around the world that are also tired of being under the thumb of the U.S. government. You know, the U.S. is notorious for trying to police the world, for running an overseas empire, and for trying to control other countries. You probably read or heard about John Perkins' book, Economic Hitman, where they send these folks in to conduct corporate espionage and to destabilize different kinds of economies. Well, countries around the world are also sick and tired of that. So what they're doing is they're creating these special economic zones, and they want to try to get a technological upper hand on the U.S., and they want to, of course, improve their own situation as well. And what better way to do it than to invite entrepreneurs and technologists in to try to build. So this is why all these special economic zones has emerged. And so I mentioned Prospera ZA. You're probably familiar with Dubai. Dubai has some of the most land-related special financial zones in the world, where they try to bring in all these different kinds of folks. They exist in Asia. They're all over the place in Latin America. This is happening in Mexico. You mentioned El Salvador, Honduras, Argentina. I'm actually going to be in Argentina, by the way, next month for a whole month, for a pop-up city event called Edge City. And all of these guys are highly interested in artificial intelligence and biotech, and they just want to have the space to come together and to work in an unencumbered fashion for a period of time. But here's the crucial thing. These spaces that host these folks are not only welcoming, but they sometimes want these places to be permanent hubs. So I mentioned Zoo Switzerland, the Zuzalu iteration of Vitalik's earlier vision. They want that to be a permanent hub potentially. So the Switzerland people are working really hard to make that a permanent location for technologists who are part of that community to come in and do that work. So this speaks very strongly to the fact that a lot of us are sick and tired of trying to deal with the government apparatus. And so if we can't try to solve the problem like internally or culturally, then why not just leave those jurisdictions altogether and build out elsewhere? Of course,
because they'll go after that jurisdiction. This is what happens. You have a like Sealand. Sealand was an anti-aircraft platform, in the English Channel. It was in international water, and somebody I claim it as mine. It's mine now. And I remember it was the late 90s, and a bunch of us libertarians knew exactly what was going to happen. What they were doing is they go, we can turn it into a data center. You could just have out in the middle of the ocean and connected the satellite of whatever the hell, and we just have all this, the secret off books of the mob or something, or the drug cartel or governments or whatever the hell. Of course, that's what they're going to say, whether that's what they did or not anyway. So they could, all of a sudden, British destroyers come out to explain it to them. Oh, hello, I mean, you're not allowed to be free. So then you have, it goes to like these data centers, like you're talking about. Eric Voorhees goes to Switzerland. And I had him on, and I asked him, I'm saying, all right, well, what's a permission slip? He goes, nothing. They just have you, I open a business. They go, okay, you have a business. You got a business? You have a business. It's all good. But what did we have? We have, Swiss bank accounts. Safety deposit boxes. It was secret, you don't know and you never get, and you have an unnamed account of whatever, and here comes the United States of America and IRS say, whoa. Man, you can't just be doing this and having people kind of, unless it's, our guys, that's okay. But, we want to go after these guys, and then they start turning over information and, you're not private anymore. It has to be space-based, lunar, whatever the hell, to the moon. Literally, you're to the moon. You got your data center, laser kind of communicating moon satellite based of CubeSat of suck it. So this is where we're going. It's eventually going to be, there isn't going to be a brick and mortar, or certainly any place, which is why IPFS is such a big thing, because it's distributed across the planet. You can't shut it down, just like you're not supposed to be able to on Bitcoin. But what happens when you get all the miners, it's a 51% attack. When the people actually processing the transactions all come together and go, this is what we want. We have been incentivized. We have been promised. We have been gazillionaires. If we do this, we vote to do that. That's what's going on. This battle for freedom never stops. And the fact that, we went to this ZETI, which is, what does that stand for anyway? It's a zone of economic something, leave me alone thing.
Yeah, zone of economic development and employment. Or maybe it's the reverse, but yeah.
So, and you were talking about, John Perkins, and I'm going, yep, we've had him on, and we had him on quite a bit, several times. But the thing is that this is years ago, because he got captured. His book about the economic hitman, you'll do what the government wants, or we got this here gun for you. And he was outing how American foreign policy and our economics and capture and all that really work. Well, what happened was, and I'm going, wow, it's kind of, you're sounding a little libertarian to me. Nope. What they were really against was the Republicans. They were against the system. They were against, and he wrapped his arms and legs around the left, Democrat, progressive movement, and we're doing it our way, and never mind. I mean, but he accurately depicted what was going on behind the scenes and how this your blood spattered brains are going to be on the document or your signature pick, and if they couldn't assassinate him or control him or whatever, then they just invaded you. And then you just got Pete Hegseth right now calling in all the generals right now in the Virginia and Quantico. We got all the generals from brigadier down, and we're gonna what? We're gonna go save the petrodollar. That's what they're gonna do. So this is happening right, not later, now, right now. But freedom is not getting extinguished. That's why we have Sterlin on, to tell you all about this. But every single one of these, if it has a place, what the Free State Project and Ian Freeman got in is offering, crypto exchanges and having ATMs. Dude, Hampshire doesn't care. They're like, peace, yeah, you're legal. Don't worry about it. Ain't nothing. Well, here comes the Fed saying, nope, you're not allowed. You're going to jail. Conspiracy to not kiss our ass. This is literally what's going on. Jacob Hornberger, Future Freedom Foundation, wrote a multiple-part series on just how stupid this prosecution was and what's going on, which is why we're arguing for a pardon. But you know what happened? Trump did the Ross Ulbricht thing, probably pissed off a lot of the bad guys. He goes, yeah, that's probably about it, too. We'll see what happens, But hopefully Roger gets out from under it. I apologize. Keep going.
No, you're good, brother. I think, to your point, doesn't matter where we build and what we do, there's always going to be this tug of war, this cat and mouse game, as you mentioned, between the controllers and the social engineers and the people trying to produce and create more freedom. It's just a tale as old as time. It's time immemorial. But that doesn't mean that we stop doing what we're doing. And it's possible at some point, this is my hope and this is my clear pill, is that we eventually we win this race, because like you said before, and this is a key message, you can't stop the momentum that the technology has, that the philosophy has. Really, with the advent of the internet, Pandora's box has been opened up for liberty, because they can propagandize, they can try to control the narratives, they can continue spouting nonsense on CNBC and Fox News or whatever fucking channel that they want to. But at the end of the day, now we have our own communication networks, we have our own channels, we're continuing to develop this technology, we're finding ways around it. I mean, here's a perfect analogy, right? Imagine if Satoshi Nakamoto, at the very beginning, if he would have presented his white paper to a regulator at FinCEN or at the Fed and said, hey, I want to roll out this currency. Well, no, it would be, do not fucking pass go. Do not collect $100. Go directly to jail. Right. So right now we're in this time period where permissionless activity is now been completely emboldened in the population, because we see that it can be done. We don't have to ask permission. And whenever any kind of regulator or any kind of system gets so constipated that you can't make a move, you can't develop a technology you want to, people are going to find ways to route around it. They always will, because this is what happens in a market environment where people can work in a permissionless fashion. You find ways to route around the blocks and the systems that are creating that impediment. And this is an amazing consequence of human ingenuity, right? And I think that that's an amazing thing, and it's going to continue to happen. This doesn't mean that there's not going to be casualties, though. We're continuing to see that. There's always going to be people who end up being scapegoats for the system and for their narrative to prevent this. But I think that we ultimately reach a point in time where we have really a culmination of this freedom ethos that is completely unstoppable, and it just becomes the dominant culture. You see the shift right now where these cryptocurrency communities, a lot of times they're their own island, right? They have their own culture, they have their own identity, their own politics, and so this is really revamping the pluralistic nature of the human species. You know, we've talked about this, I think, a lot over time, you and I have, but also just a conversation that happens is that for the longest time, the state it's been so easy for them to engineer and manufacture consent, to use Noam Chomsky's term, that it was very difficult for people to think outside the box. It was actually easier to propagandize people, but that's starting to shift and to change, because now the accessibility to information is just completely unleashed. And I think that I don't think either one of us will say that that's a bad thing. This is one of the biggest clear pills and one of the biggest pieces of optimistic that lend credence to my personal futurism. I think you mentioned at the very beginning of the show for me to describe what futurism really is. And what futurism is about thinking about the future in an optimistic way. It's about trying to behold where we're headed. And to do that, if you think negatively, you can't really be a futurist, because everything is going to feel technocratic and dystopian and a real tragedy. But I do think that we are on a march toward greater freedom. And if we're not, then, to me, it doesn't matter. I can't live that way. I want to live as optimistically and as freedom-oriented as possible. And that's how creators have to think, because if they're completely pessimistic, of course, then you just hide under your bed sheets and by the way, this is another thing that I have to mention that hasn't been mentioned yet. What we're dealing with also currently, as a result of our institutional failures, has been a crisis of meaning, or has been a meaning crisis. One of my favorite psychologists, his name is John Vervaeke, he published this massive YouTube series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And one of his primary claims is that because of the rise of he doesn't use this terminology, but because of the rise of this technocratic elite, this rise in institutional corruption and failure, people have lost a sense of meaning, and this is exemplified by the rise in the rates of mental illness, depression, anxiety, social anomie, which is just social chaos and social fear. Suicidality rates have also increased. People feel more disconnected and isolated than ever before. But this is creating the opposite reaction, which people are seeking out new communities and new people to connect with that share their values. It's almost like a rekindling of human connectivity in the human spirit. So this is why this movement is happening. People are tired of living in sadness, and this is the opposite reaction to this. We're trying to awaken from this meaning crisis that we're currently facing, which is exacerbated by the systems that we find ourselves embedded in. So this is a moment that we have to take a hold of, that we have to grasp in order to move forward.
Well, we're creating a use case for everything that you're talking about. Here, I show the audience. Occupy the land with attainable housing. This is what we're building out here, and we got, all our videos of us, building and doing and whatever. And then you have this. Local mesh network. Occupy communications. Well, it's called OuterNet. John Sneisen from the Economic Truth came out here from Canada, and we put this cell tower up at 13 miles. We were getting 200 down, 100 up. And we go, whoa, what the crap? And it covered over like 400 square miles of this stuff. Then we have, OuterNet. You just see us out there putting it up on the mountain, for the relay. Solar powered. It's got battery in there. Just offered, have this relay up there. And they go, well, they could go get it, man. It took us 3.5 hours to hike up there. You want it that bad, you can go get it, But this is the demonstration of we're doing it. We're doing. Let me say, we done it. It's done. Done. So, do you have to have a private jurisdiction of a government-approved freedom economic zone of you're allowed in the permission slip from the crown? No. Let's get far enough out in the desert top of the mountain, they can suck it. You want to go get it. I'll do another one for $1.95. So our entire system that we did with the dishes, and 35 miles away, we wanted to test to another part of the community, a good friend of ours out here. The entire thing for the dish, the batteries, the solar, everything, $750. And now it's only $70 to get the little dish to hook up, and it's free. Hello! It's over, but there's a lot coming. I mean, this is, it's a thing. So I just want to make sure people are inspired that, it's not over. It's never over. But we're going into thermonuclear be over, And if you're not able to sustain yourself, to bypass, to be able to continuing on, then we're lost. But there are so many people like Sterlin that aren't giving up. It's not, and I am here to provide you a use case. So Sterlin, and all this stuff, you're going, we need like OuterNet got to use Occupy. Ernie helped with the whatever. He bought the hardware to go. I'm going, waiting on you now, Sterlin. Waiting on you.
Bro, there's Ernie, there's something I think of too. This movement for creating our own self-sufficiency and self-efficiency has been ongoing too for a long time, and it's part of the cultural fabric of people even in the United States, right? This is the sort of Emersonian spirit. You remember Ralph Waldo Emerson, self-sufficiency, individualism, also Thoreau's Walden, being able to live on your own and have your own kind of community, and to build and to create without having to rely on governments and institutions. This is still built into the fabric of our culture in the U.S. Think of this. I got to spend some time at the Earthship community in New Mexico. You're probably, I don't know if you've talked about this on your show, but I mean, if there is a community that really embodies sort of the anarchist spirit, the Walden-esque spirit, it's these guys, because they're virtually completely off the grid. The last time I actually got to spend some time in an Earthship, I got to study and learn about the guy who created that movement. His name's Michael Reynolds. He has an architectural school there called the Biotecture Institute, where he teaches people how to build these completely sustainable houses called Earthships. And one of the things about Earthships that's most impressive is that they take all of their energy renewably from the environment around them, and they have an equilibrium in the heating, in the processing of water from usable potable water into polluted water that then is cycled through a garden within the house. It's really a beautiful way to develop a whole community around principles of not only self-sufficiency and sustainability, but also freedom and self-reliance, where you don't have to rely on the corporations or the governments to give you what you want. This is what you guys
above the grid.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. This is when I was there last, which was like 5 years ago now. They were only on the grid because they had an internet connection that was attached to the grid. But now there's ways that they can set up their own mesh networks. If some people consider Starlink enough to be decentralized, it's not really. But there are more methods coming online that will allow people to even access the internet without having to worry about, people even in the Bitcoin and crypto community have thought about launching their own satellites as well. So this is going to come out hopefully in due time, where people can be completely 100% off the grid. And even now, if you want to, you don't have to have the internet. You could not be connected to it, or you could have your own local kind of communication network. There's no problem doing that. So really the spirit is there. We've always had a kind of a community ethos of being more self-sufficient, and we just need to really remind people of that, because as technology has developed, as governments have tried to maintain more control, they've made it really taboo, or they considered it taboo if you want to go off the grid. And they've actually come after people for growing their own food, for having their own garden.
You're doing it wrong!
Right, that's right. Ron Paul was huge on the raw milk thing. Raw milk being quote unquote illegal, or you're not being able to transact it on a market. By the way, that brings me up to a philosophy that bears mentioning that's really critical to this whole movement. And it's this philosophy that Samuel Edward Konkin III talked about, called counter-economics, or agorism. And in his perspective, the way that we push back against these institutions of force and power is that we don't have to use violence. All that we really need to do is open up a black and gray circular economy where people transact in ways that take power away from the state, because you're not giving any of your taxes to the state anymore. And that's all built into this these architectural movements like Michael Reynolds' biotecture, the earth-steading community, all these intentional communities that are growing up around the world. You probably had Derek Bros on the show as well. Bros,
yep.
He left the U.S. and went to Mexico and started up what he calls the Conscious Agora, which is an intentional community built around his own personal principles and values, which are largely the values of freedom. But Derek is also a vegan, so if he wants to have vegan people involved in those community, which he does, and I think he's tried to balance it out with the meat eating as well. But that's something that you can do. You can tailor these communities around your own values and your own principles, and create a way to live. And the cool thing about I'm going to shill Mexico a little bit here. The cool thing about Mexico is that the government there is so corrupt and so fractured that a lot of communities in Mexico have started their own intentional communities. Some have been based on expats and digital nomads. Some have also been based in intentional communities. There's a city, or is it a state? I think maybe it's a city. It's Chiron in Mexico. That community there of indigenous people actually kicked out all the police and all the bureaucrats and started up their own community, sans the politicians. So this is something that is built into that cultural heritage of Mexicans. Don't trust their this is largely Latin America. They don't trust their politicians or government.
As long as you don't compete with the cartel, they don't care.
100%. Right, and the cartel doesn't really care either. I mean, as long as you don't want to step on their toes and get into the drug dealing. But there are quote unquote rules, but it's certainly easier to boot up an intentional community or a conscious community in Mexico and in Latin America than it is in the U.S. But even in the U.S.,
I had recently John Bush on, and in fact, he was at Ron Paul's event. And he came up to me. We had a booth there for Occupy the Land, and he goes, "Ernie, you were right." And this is what the philosophy difference was between what we're doing and what Derek and he are doing. Is that there is a decision you have to make? Do you want an intentional or an unintentional community? For me, an unintentional community is this is mine. Inside this fence, mine. That might be yours over there or not. I don't care. This is mine. Okay? If you have an intentional community, there's still a property owner or somebody's in charge, or it's collective, whatever. And then, rule one, don't be a dick. And there's always a dick, and crap happens. So that is why I advocate for an unintentional community, but you need communication. And one, don't be a dick. Be a good neighbor. Be an add to your community, not a subtraction. That kind of thing. Well, this is why you need, to have communication. What we're talking here. We got the mesh network we put up. I want, I need, I buy, I sell, I'll barter, I'll trade. I got, backhoe for fence post. I mean, I do this, dig a hole, give me some fence. I mean, whatever. This is why it's so important to have communication. So I wanted to make sure that he and I got to talk about this, and he came on. And there's, why didn't this work? Well, there was this guy. There's always that guy, that family, that woman, that Nazi, that, Karen, that whatever. So this is why I advocate when you centralize, even that you do you, there's no central plan for freedom. If you can create that, but then the kids, they, that cute little 10-year-old is 16 with his two-stroke whipping around the, making noise, you got issues. So I always ask 3 questions. What do I have to do? What is required of me? What can't I do? What am I prevented from doing? And what's your conflict resolution? You answer those 3 questions, then I'll think about it. Well, we'll work it out. No, you work it out and then let me know. Okay, I'm just saying. So this is what I am seeing being part of a community out here in the desert. A lot of the people, I'm at the end of the trail of 4 months of tractor, me making road to even get the bus out here kind of desert. So when I did that, who are my neighbors? I got one neighbor within 5 miles. Within 10 miles, I got like 4. I mean, this. So these valleys out here, and so out in the desert, well, I don't give a crap what they do, but we can be neighbors. I trade out a little bit, do the maintenance of the road, and I got all the duck eggs I want, which are big, by the way. So I'm going, this is how it should be done, and I provide the use case for you, Sterling. All of these ideas that you have to have a use case. This is why I'm working with Aaron Day, and, Roger's back there somewhere, promoting. But he didn't want to make emphasis on that right now. But Aaron Day and I are working on this. I just had one of the developers of Xano on. I need to get the Russian guy. Because Xano, the core tech behind that is the core tech that is Monero. He's the one that created Monero. So he's taken that, and that starts to get Monero maximalist kind of crap too. Because what happens? The man comes in, we got a hacker contest for cracking Monero. Damn it, they're out there being private. Can't have that. So this is always under attack. So I wanted to make sure that your developers, I have 18 acres out in the middle of creating a community with communication to do exactly what you're talking about. This is what we're doing. As I'm building and doing the reason I'm keeping doing the show and everything and emphasizing this is because I know this technology is out there. We use it. That's what IPFS is. So you got something you need to test. You got somebody do a ZEDI if I don't care. The man can't even get out here. You're past the end of where we grade the road and kind of you're not, and we don't want to whatever, but when it starts being productive, what do they want to do? We're going to have to get control. We're going to give you some services whether you like it or not. We're going to service the herd with the steer. You know what that means? They're going to service you, So I'm going, no. So we're far enough at the moment. But the city be a-coming. We're 70 miles west of Phoenix, but, I'm seeing the lights get closer. So now is the time. Make use of this opportunity, Sterling. Let us know how we can integrate and do and whatever, because we got the communication. 200 down, 100 up. Off the grid.
Man,
mesh.
Ernie, I love it, that the fact that we can talk about these ideas in a really concrete way, because you're exactly right. It's not just abstract. You have the photos and the video. You're doing it right now. And really, I can't emphasize how much and how often this is actually happening right now. How many people are actually building this stuff, right? Because Derek's thing is real. He's got his own land. He purchased his own land in Mexico. He's inviting people actively to live and to build, and then to experiment with different ways of engaging and interacting together. So 100%, I think a lot of people we talk about cryptocurrency in terms of a killer app or a killer use case, and that originally has been finance or has been money, and even that quote unquote killer app hasn't come to fruition yet. But the other killer app is for it to unleash and unlock different kinds of contracts via smart contracts, different types of governance services, with tokens to incentivize different kinds of voting. So there's a very clear use case for having and using cryptocurrency to incentivize better kinds of behaviors on the ground in the places that we live. I want to give and a lot of people are like, well, there's no historical precedent for this. How are we ever going to make this work? But we do have examples in history of more libertarian-based societies that last a long time. I'm a huge fan of always mentioning Gaelic Ireland. If you guys have ever had a conversation around the way that the Gaelic Irish formed their society in the Middle Ages and before, I think a lot of people would have a wake-up call. So let me explain this a bit. So in Gaelic Ireland, they had a system of polycentric law called Brehon law. And brehons were effectively a system of private judges or private arbitrators that resolved disputes. In Gaelic Ireland, and by the way, this society lasted some 2,000 years until the Crusades, right, until England invaded Ireland and really disrupted their ecosystem. But anytime there was a problem, anytime there was a dispute, their dispute resolution was always arbitrated by this decentralized group of private arbitrators where people could choose. And how it worked was like this. So there was these localized communities in Gaelic Ireland referred to as, they were just tribes. I think they were referred to as tuath. And how it worked is these tribes had to pay in these sureties. Sureties are kind of like these insurances or bonds to this greater Brehon system. So if there was a dispute between a tribe, they could be reconciled by the Brehons. If there was an individual dispute, they would be reconciled or adjudicated. Now, one thing I want to make clear, too, is that there was no such thing as a crime against the Gaelic Irish state. There was no government. There was a monarch, but it was more of a ceremonial type of position. They didn't really have any power. So the worst thing that could happen in these, let me give an example. So say worst case scenario, somebody committed murder. Well, the family of the person who was murdered would come out and they would make a case against who they thought was the murderer. There would be an investigation. Then, of course, they would choose the brehon that they would use in the trial. Now, the person who was accused could choose not to go to trial, not to face potential consequences, and they could say, nope, I'm not going to do that. And what the sentence was a case of exile. They would be exiled from those communities. And if they stayed around, there was something referred to as vergeld in Gaelic. And vergeld just means blood money or man money. So if you stayed around and you were exiled, well, you could basically be killed, and then obviously the system, as it sounds, well, how would that work? On paper, it sounds great, but it sounds like, that would create kind of a brutal, barbaric society. But the reality is, this lasted again for 2,000 years, and that was the blood money or man money thing was a worst case scenario. It obviously worked this polycentric style of society or polycentric law worked very well because it lasted 2,000 years, and they lived in relative harmony compared to mainland Europe with their monocultures and their theological theocratic or theocracies, right? Theocratic statism. And this is a perfect example of just one way that we get to choose how we structure our societies. We don't have to live in these Westphalian style nation states. So there's things that we can pick from, historical examples that we can use to empower and to inform these newer organizations that we're creating. And we only have technology to add to it and to simplify it, right? But I think the key, and this is something that we always come back to, is that what's important is that we do what we can to flatten our institutions, right, to decentralize our structures, and to allow the quote-unquote rule sets to arise from the bottom up rather than from the top down. It's always through some bureaucratic controller and some central planner and some command economy that we end up in some totalitarian technocratic dystopia. It's time and time again, it's through that conduit that society begins to degrade, and then we end up with the problems that we end up with. So we do have examples. I recommend everyone to check out, there's a book The scholar, his name is not Doug Casey. Doug Casey actually talks about this, but it's Gerald Casey, I believe is his name. And he wrote a book called Libertarian Anarchism, and he goes into great detail on the case of Gaelic Ireland and how it was one of the first fully functional libertarian societies. Again, this is not to say that it was perfect. There were certainly intertribal conflict and skirmishes and many wars. It was still the Middle Ages, but they did live in a more prosperous fashion compared to greater mainland Europe. At least there was way less bloodshed in these societies. So I think that's a really good piece of history that a lot of people could take into context and contextualize it with what we're working on right now. Ernie.
You know, and to get an idea of what we're really up against, you know, you mentioned Derek Bros. And Derek's a good friend. We've had him on. I just sent to Donna to, you know, go get him on. And he did this. The Pyramid of Power, Volume 1, Top of the Pyramid, Chapter 17. Who and or what are we up against? And, you know, there's Derek, man. He did a whole series. A lot of people donated for him to do this series. And it's, oh, my God. And number 17, all right, here's the problem. You want to know who we're up against? What's up? Well, this is it. So we have that on. It's just put in the Pyramid of Power, Chapter 17, Volume 1. It'll come up. And I'll get Derek on to talk about this because he understands. You know, he was just one of us, just a guy, young kid out of, I think, Houston. And he just, man, like with you know, he went through the grind with the man and the justice system of unfair of whatever. And he's like, oh, hell no, I'm going to go out and be free here. Watch this. So this is a community that we're associated with guys like Sterlin, that there is, it used to be the threat. I remember having Butler Schaefer on. He was a constitutional law professor out of Los Angeles and a big influence on a lot of us. And he was, you know, there were meetings that they had in New York where they'd have, you know, Rothbard and him and kind of the objectivist Ayn Rand, you know, leave me alone-us in the 60s thing. And if there was a Hellfire missile hit that apartment, boom, it'd have been over. I mean, you know, they'd set way back. But that's not possible anymore. There's so much of this philosophy that is worldwide. It will not be stopped. They, them, those are going to try and delay it as much as they can. The future is abundance. The future out here, and like we wanted to make sure we're outside. We're outside of the system. You know, I wake up in the morning, you know, I still got charge of my battery, and I'm 100% going in on the little bus thing and the power and run my welder, and kind of I don't have an electric bill. Hello! You know, so this is, it's not only possible, it's being done. And that's one of the reasons why Occupy the Land was a big thing for me. We needed to demonstrate that you can do this. Put your effort towards being separate, towards being outside, being above the grid. This is important to me to demonstrate that it can be done. Had I the technology when I was, you know, a young man in my 30s or whatever, 20s, or having a young family, I would have already done it. Just in the last few years, as Starlink for communication, solar, batteries, inverters have gotten cheap as hell. What would have cost me $60,000, $70,000 even a few years ago is now $16,000. You know, I could, how much? Hell, I pay that much in freaking electric bills. I mean, you know, this is, you know, for a year. So you're paid off within a year or two of, you know, bite me. It's happening now. And this is where I'm hoping to inspire the Lovolution to be that direction. That's why we have the Lovolution Decentralized. You know, they're working with Aaron Day on the Xano project. But that's not the only one. That's not the only thing. That's not, you know, what's going on. Go subscribe. Go to Occupy the Land and, you know, do something, you know, whatever. Go donate. Go be part of something. Find out what Sterlin's doing. Because I'm telling you, we are going to emphasize everything that Sterlin and I have been talking about because we lived it. We understand the importance of it. We know the vectors that they're going to come after. And you conspiracy tinfoil hat wearer, who are they? You crazy man? I don't know.
Yeah.
There are those that just want to be left alone, and there's those that won't leave them alone. That's who they, them, those are.
Ernie, you made me think of something. I know we're getting kind of close to the end here, but I do want to express how my own wife and I live and how we've kind of approached this changing situation. So everyone's probably familiar with this notion of the Great Resignation. So you mentioned COVID, and we talked, or you talked a little bit about when COVID hit, the quote unquote pandemic hit. What ended up happening was that a lot of people, they started working from home, right? And what they realized very quickly is like, why do I need an office space? Why do I need to be saddled to one single location when I can also travel around? So what this really contributed to, yeah, absolutely, right. So it contributed to this concept of digital nomadism, and this is ever since COVID. Even before that, I was already doing a ton of traveling in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, but we just decided to uproot, and so we spend most of our time throughout the year traveling to different temporary pop-ups, all these communities that we're talking about. I have personally visited, stayed sometimes a month at a time. I mentioned I'm going to be in Patagonia. CC and I will be in Patagonia in Argentina for the Edge City event. We're going to be there a whole month. So this has become part of our lifestyle and how we live more freely. And of course, trying to use crypto as often as possible throughout this process to detach ourselves from being being deeply connected to the system. Of course, everyone, I think, to some degree or other, is still connected to the system in some way. Like we have a home base in the United States, but then we try to be gone and experimenting with some of these places as much as possible in the hope that one day maybe we decide to choose one and to live there permanently. And this is the same reason we talked about Derek a lot, the reason that he originally left the U.S. instead of in Mexico, because he saw the technocratic writing on the wall that where we're headed is not necessarily a great place. But like you said, Ernie, there's all of us out here who are actually doing this. We're living it. We're trying to figure out ways where we can be more free, because at the end of the day, it's not just about words. It's not just about the philosophy. It's about the action. It's about the deeds. It's about how can we actually push forward in our own lives to liberate ourselves, and trying to figure that out is what inspires other people to do the same thing. I'm a huge fan of this notion of modeling. That it's an idea in psychology. If we can demonstrate in real time that freedom works, other people are going to be inspired by that, and they're going to try to make freedom work for themselves in their own lives as well. And we see a lot of anarchists and libertarians online. They're so angry. They're so mad. They spend most of their time screaming into the void, arguing with people. I used to spend all of my time online just debating with people, hoping I could argue my way into freedom. But the reality is we have to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We have to try to find freedom for ourselves, because it's unlikely to happen, at least full-scale freedom in our lifetime, probably is a multi-generational process at best. So I think this is one of the most important and profound messages that we've talked about on today's podcast is how do we liberate ourselves? And the way to do that is to find our own freedom and to take advantage of the tools that we have in our pocket and at our fingertips right now. So if that's a concluding message, that's definitely one that I have to say for folks.
Keep me in mind. Help me help you. Help me help you, which we can help everybody, So I'm Sterlin, keep me informed. We've been following Sterlin for a long time. There was one, I remember the first time when I met with Sterlin, they were doing a thing called Smart Cash as a crypto that was available to what do you call the slums in Rio de Janeiro? There was a word for it,
Is it favelas? Is that it?
Yeah, favelas. I think that's what
Right.
It was like the hood. I mean, whatever. It was the 10 shacks up on the hill kind of thing. And they had a mechanism by which they could actually spend it at like convenience stores down, and they would get a bunch of product, go up and use crypto, and kind of become a thing. And the government's like, whoa, it's a thing. This is kind of the mindset that I had. You go to Anarchapulco, they were all pushing on, the hotels and the bars and the restaurants to be able to accept crypto. And you get up and I go, man, you need to go to the vendors on the beach. You need to be able to do crypto, guys selling the hats and the suntan lotion and doing massages and whatever. Get it down to the people. Get it down. That's where it comes from. That's where it happens. This is why we're doing this. I created this because this is the next stage of my life of being more just to live the example as an inspiration for others to occupy the land. You'll own nothing, and here's your happy shot. I knew what they meant. They don't want you being self-sufficient. They don't want you to be out doing what you can do outside of the sanction of the man. This, I want to help. This is what I do for decades. You going to help me? Come on, man.
I love it. I love it, brother. I'm right here with you. We'll keep working and pushing it forward. I'm so glad we've maintained the relationship too over time, Ernie. I love what you do, man. And you're probably one of the strongest voices that continue to push for reason and sanity in this world, right? And there's just still too few of us. I think more and more people are waking up, as we talked about, but we have to continue, sounding the alarm bells, my friend. So thanks so much for having me on the show today, Ernie. I really, really appreciate it. And happy to do it again. I think these conversations are tremendously important. We talked about education. Education is a good piece of this. We have to do knowledge sharing and skill sharing. That's all part of the process as well. So
3 hours went by fast, didn't it?
Oh gosh, yeah, it did. And there's still more we could get in. We can still get into, we could probably do this all day.
I'm sure we could. Donna already contacted Derek Bros. We'll get him on to talk about, it'll get into a lot of this stuff, but we're going to use the pyramid of power thing to have a full understanding of what we're really up against, which is, and a lot of the experiences that we've had. And I could see it. When they started the crypto thing, I'm going, where's the human element? There's a human element somewhere. No, it's math. This guy goes, no, there's a human. And then here comes Blockstream, and what I'm going, yeah, okay. There's always a human element in there. But this effort has borne so much fruit and has become such a threat to they, them, those that it's not going to go. They'll put us into a freaking war with Russia if they have to. I mean, here we go. So you need to take all of this discussion that we've had to heart. A lot of people in the freedom community, because you're not going to get a lot of support from the normies. You're not going to get a lot of support from the inner city of therein kind of, we got to, vote ourselves free. If you think you're going to vote yourself free, you have not been paying attention. So freedom's not given, it's taken. And you don't got to do it with violence, you just do it. Do it. You're not doing it? You're doing it wrong. Yeah, but you're doing it, So that's why inspiration is so powerful. And you've been a big inspiration to me, Sterlin. Thank you for coming on and spending this much time with us. After you do your trips and you go to these places and you experience that, keep in mind, intentional or unintentional. I got to join your hippie commune, with a libertarian L after it, or anarchist branding or whatever, or can I have my own private land in amongst a geographical area of kind of the valley or something? That's kind of my advocacy for a lot of reasons. But a lot of povertarians, they're like, hey man, I need to, give me and trade out, I'll camp and, change out my transmission on my RV on your property of whatever. I mean, that's always what winds up happening. And there may be a time for that, and a lot of people have done that. But I'm looking forward to being able, generation next, grandma, dad, mom, somebody's got an acre or two are willing to get you out of the house and go start building. This is kind of what we're advocating, and you could live a first-class, high standard of living life free of all of these controls. And when you get far enough out away from the city lights that your Orion constellation has a penis, because if you're out far enough from the lights, you see this star cluster that looks like a penis below Orion's belt. I never knew that was there. I was going, God, it looks like he's got a penis. So I put in Orion's penis, and sure as crap, it comes up all over the place. So if you're not far enough that your Orion doesn't have a penis, you're not far enough away from the city. Just saying. That's how you know. All right? So there's that. Thanks for this show. Brother. I know you got to get going, but keep me in mind. Stay in contact. When you get done, you think it's time to share what you learned, you get right back on. And keep us in mind. We are a ready use case out here in the desert. You feel me?
Absolutely, brother. Thanks so much, Ernie. Let's do it again sometime, man. Have a good one. Much love. You have all of my links and all of my information, so you can just feel free to share that. And I've been on here, like you said, everyone can go watch our past shows as well, but this has definitely been one of the most important. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Goodbye, brother. It's been awesome. Peace.
See you, bro.